It's going. Yep.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today is January 24th. It's Friday, and it's about 12:30 in the afternoon right now. This video, from the beginning, before I even get started, I have no idea how long this next portion is going to take. Just for you as the viewer, this next batch of information that I'm going to be going through the process of recording, compiling and editing together, and then getting shared to you, you're looking at something that's probably might be anywhere from 6 to 10 hours of information that I am psychologically prepared to deliver for you as the listener to absorb and try and assemble the pieces I've given you to make sense of what's going on. Not just about my own situation, but as far as the big picture. There's over the past couple of weeks, past 3 weeks or so, there's been a lot of things that have happened, a lot of moving parts, and because of things that have happened, of which I'm planning to speak about, but again, I'm telling you, there's going to be 6 to 10 hours of information, and there's nothing I can tell you right now that's going to tell you everything. So for you, if you're going to mentally prepare yourself to invest the time watching this, understand that you just really got to put yourself into a neutral position and just be patient and allow me to deliver the information. And for you, this next portion, all of it combined, not only am I asking you to put yourself in a neutral position, whatever good for you, but also at the same time, you might not be aware of a lot of things that I'm about to present to you. So whatever you think you know, remember, you got to kind of put that on the side and put yourself in a neutral position. And to add to that, this is going to be something where it's kind of like a big mystery, where I'm inviting you to pretend that you are a detective. You're a detective and you're trying to solve a crime and try and figure out who all is involved, who the guilty parties are, who the non-guilty parties are, and anything in between, okay? That's the best I can give you as far as just a general idea is where to put your mind as we proceed forward, because all of the information I'm going to be sharing with you is going to be real life stuff. It's going to be my real life experiences, and I'm going to be telling you things that I have not necessarily disclosed on camera yet, but now because of things that have happened as of the past few days or past week, the energy has been hitting me, telling me that I need to start getting ready to deliver this next batch of information. Everything I'm talking about, it's like an improv. I'm speaking on the fly. I have no idea what exactly I'm going to be speaking about. I have not pre-thought any of this out. It's just coming out of my mouth as it comes out. So as you're hearing it, this is like essentially the first time I'm hearing it in the context of speaking about it, even though I know where I'm going and I know what I'm going to be extracting a lot of memories that, everything that's been happening. Well, I have a pretty good memory, and it's all organized in my brain. So when I'm saying I'm speaking, as I'm speaking, I'm essentially extracting my memories in a way that I'm articulating it for you to put it together. Where essentially I could keep my mouth shut, and everything I'm sharing with you, it's already in my brain, and it's not like it's new information. When I'm saying all this, I'm saying that I'm speaking like on an improv and it's not pre-planned. Well, this is stuff it's all in my brain. It's not anything I have to really go over, but it's very time consuming to bring all of this out in the form of words where I'm speaking it in a slow, calm, and I'm trying to do it in chronological order so that you as the listener and the viewer can make sense of it. But inside my brain, it's just everything's just flying around, right? But I have to slow myself down to speak on the camera. And with that said, I am very much aware, with what I'm about to share, it's going to be it's going to create a lot of waves. Everything I'm about to share, there's going to be a lot of there's going to be a massive ripple effect where there's going to be a lot of consequences. There's anybody that's amongst the guilty parties out there, you're not going to be happy with this video. You're going to be not only are you going to be angry and upset, but you're also going to be very scared, knowing that anybody who's not part of your circle, you're going to be terrified knowing that there's a bunch of people out there who are now aware of this information. And for some people, I am prepared to be pointing fingers at certain individuals. And if you're someone who has watched all of my videos so far, remember, if you're somebody who's new, you have not watched my videos, and this is one of the first videos you've clicked on, I'm literally like, in all sincerity, you need to stop watching this and go back to the very beginning and start from square one, because I'm just saying everything I'm prepared to start talking about. If you have not put in the time and the effort to watch all of my previous videos, which is probably like 60 hours of information, you're way behind right now. If you're just getting here and you're brand new to this channel, maybe you've watched one or two and you haven't put in the time, you have your own reasons, and it just depends on how long you've known me and been around. But I'm saying if you have not watched all of those, this video is not going to make sense to you, and you really should either just stop watching and just leave my channel as if you don't know me, or if you are going to invest any time, you need to start from the beginning, just like you're picking up a brand new book and you've got a whole series to read, or you're starting to watch a brand new TV show, and there's like multiple episodes, multiple seasons. Well, you don't start a new show on like the third or fourth or fifth season. You typically start at the beginning, right? I've talked about this before, but I'm just saying, if you're brand new, do not proceed forward, because this isn't going to make sense. And this video that, this next 6 to 10 hours of information, the only way for this to make sense for you is if you've already put in the time. You've put in the time, and now you're here ready to receive the next batch. If you're anything shy of that, you need to stop what you're doing and go back and start from episode 1. Welcome to the rabbit hole. There's a lot for you to get caught up on, and the whole point of me recording all of this and putting in all of this time is so that I don't have to continually have to repeat myself, because everything I've talked about, it's recorded, and so that should be in your brain whether or not you remember it. If I start talking about certain things, if you might not remember it immediately, but when I start talking about certain things, I might jog your memory, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, I remember you talking about that. Okay, I'm good. Right, so that's the whole point. So this video is going to get very, very in-depth as a continuation from everything that I've shared so far. So, again, you have to... I'm hoping that you've watched everything so far. You've put in the 60 hours or however much it is, which means, this is an advanced video for you. And at the same time, I'm very much aware that, law enforcement, as a viewer, you might be someone who's within law enforcement, or you might be somebody who's within the military in whatever branch. It doesn't make a difference to me. I'm just saying I am very much aware that part of my viewers are law enforcement, which means also if you're not part of law enforcement, right, you're somebody who's not part of military or law enforcement, understand that I'm making this video. My target audience right now is law enforcement, so this video is primarily geared towards law enforcement to help them attain specific information that they might not have right now, or they might have it, but right now they need me to speak about it on camera in order to get certain things moving, you know. The only way to accomplish certain things, well, I have, you know, for me, from my position, I have my position, I have things about me that other people do not have, and in order to put certain things in motion, you know, whether it's law enforcement or military or angels or Heavenly Father himself, because of who I am and things that I know and experiences that I've had that nobody else has had, and the fact that I'm still alive right now at this stage in the game, there are certain times where it's literally up to me to get on camera and speak about certain things, or I have to do certain things, you know, out in the real world, in the sense and the context of putting things in motion, which is essentially like I do something, which is essentially like opening a door, which means all of my friends and people on the back who, you know, who are watching out for me, and they're making this big giant, there's a giant big investigation figuring out who all is involved, you know, trying to figure out who all is involved so that everybody who's involved, as far as the bad guys, we don't miss anybody. You know, the whole point is we don't miss anybody. And the only way to really figure out who all is involved is if I put my life on the line, or I put myself at risk in order to create these waves or open these doors that puts things in motion. Because once things get put in motion, well, any bad guys or gatekeepers or anybody that's been trying to block information or trying to stop me, or they're plotting and scheming different things, but all of a sudden I open this door and now they're exposed. Okay, the door's open, all my friends behind me, they got their cameras and video recorders or drones or whatever. There you go. And I just let them in, and then they go after whoever's part of it. So that's kind of the analogy that I'm giving you right now. So when I said the energy is kind of telling me this, you know, I've been saying, I said a little bit ago that over the past few days, week, this energy has been telling me it's time to get on camera again and start speaking about very specific things. And these things that I'm talking about, or am about to start talking about, is really gonna get things moving, and it's gonna get a lot of people fucking really stressed out. But at the same time, if you're on my side, or maybe you don't even have anything to do with this, you know, whatever, if you're kind of a neutral person, or you are on my side, well, understand this isn't it. What I'm going to be sharing with you is nothing for you to be scared of, because I'm going to be essentially just going to be handing you puzzle pieces, connecting these dots, showing you the when and where of how certain things transpired and why they transpired the way they did, and at the same time what I was up to that allowed these things to happen, right? So I'm going to be sharing a lot of stuff with you that I haven't talked about on camera yet. I've mentioned before that there are things that I haven't been wanting to talk about until certain things play out, and now is the time for me to start revealing certain things that I've really been wanting to talk about, but it hadn't been time yet, and now we're there. So it's just a matter of you as the viewer to be patient and to just put yourself in a neutral state. Whatever you think you know, okay, put it to the side, and then once the video's over, whatever information I've given you, you know, the video's over, you don't have any more information, you're not absorbing you're not absorbing any more information because the video's over, right? So imagine this is an analogy. This is all the information I gave you in one packet, right? And then everything you know is right here. So now you have this, and now I give you a whole bunch more puzzle pieces. So imagine you've been working on putting a puzzle together, but you know, just you don't have all the pieces. But now all of a sudden I've given you a whole new handful of pieces, and I've tried to explain to you where they all go, and therefore, once you get all of these pieces assembled, you're going to see a much larger perspective of what's going on, okay? But at the same time, there's only so much I can give you, so remember, I'm giving you as much as I can, but when it's all said and done, obviously there's going to be more I can give you, but we're just not there yet, okay? So take what I give you, and then what you know at the end, you can start putting it all together. That's my objective, to help you. Okay, so I got 5 minutes left on the timer, And before before I start transitioning and all this stuff, you know, I need to make my prayer. So this is a prayer for me and also a prayer for you as a viewer too. But, you know, Heavenly Father, you know, archangels, all the angels that are within my company, I'm just asking you for, you know, for your protection and guidance to help me deliver this information in the best possible way. That way, whoever's listening, they can take it and receive it and make sense of what's going on. I understand that by doing this, I am putting my life at risk, you know, just by even stepping on camera and mentioning certain people and talking about certain events, anything could happen, and I could, you know, I could pay with my life. Anything really bad and scary could happen as a product of getting this uploaded and shared on YouTube. You know, I haven't got it shared yet, but, you know, because we're just getting started. But, you know, I'm just making the prayer now, just asking for your protection and fortification. So that way, you know, not only help me make it through the recording portion, but I still got to get the video edited and get a whole bunch of visuals added. You know, and then I got to go invest the time sitting at the library or somewhere with an internet connection and get all this uploaded. And you know, it's probably going to take me 30 hours, I'm guessing, altogether, because I got to review it all too. So I'm just asking for protection through the whole process of all of this. And then also, once I do get it fully uploaded and, you know, shared for whoever's watching it now, that protection continues following me, because again, once it goes live for whoever's watching this now, you know, just imagine the types of waves that are going to be, you know, the waves and everything that's going to be, it's like pushing over a domino, essentially. The dominoes, certain dominoes are going to start falling and certain doors are going to start opening. And this is where I can expect, as far as me, I can expect a whole bunch of bad guys coming after me to try and make me disappear or murder me, and then make you know, try to remove all existence of me so you guys don't even know where I went. So, you know, I'm just asking for the protection of that. And then at the same time, you know, law enforcement, military, if you guys happen to watch these videos, again, I'm asking for your guys' help and your guys' protection. You know, I'm not the bad one. I'm just trying to give you guys the information. I did survive. I've survived all of this, and I'm just, you know, I'm after the people who are responsible, you know, the shot callers, the really bad, sadistic people. And I also very much understand there were a lot of people who were tricked and deceived, and bad things happened in the past, and, you know, it's not that big of a deal as long as I'm, you know, as long as everybody's starting to see what's actually going on, and then we all start working together to address the source of our problems. That way we can remove these really bad people from this reality. That way everybody else can continue moving forward in their lives without getting fucked with or having to worry about having their shit stolen or their children disappearing on account of all the human trafficking and pedophiles and stuff that are running free. You know, so the whole goal is to get all those sick, disgusting criminals, whatever layer, you know, from highest to lowest as far as the social hierarchy, whatever position they're in, you know, I'm just calling them out. You know, we got to get all of them removed, and then, you know, that way everybody else who's not one of them, we can all move forward and go live our lives in peace to the best of our abilities. And that's my goal, and that's what I'm trying to accomplish. And, you know, yeah, shit happens in the past, and I'm willing to forgive a lot of people. Just if, you know, if you're somebody who got lied to and deceived, and you just had a misperception of me, and you thought I had lost my mind when I was actually just dealing with some really fucked up, scary stuff and bad people, and I just didn't know who to trust, which is partly why I was behaving the way that I was. Felt like I was alone, had nobody in my corner, and that's why I was the way I was. So I'm just, if you know about me in the past, that, you know, don't judge me based off my past. Look at where I'm at now and the fact that I'm still alive, and I'm still trying to communicate with you guys, trying to help you guys find some type of clarity and transparency and help you attain the missing puzzle pieces that you might not have. But at the same time, I feel like many of you might be aware of a lot more now than you were, you know, six years ago, 5 years ago. You guys know a lot more now, and we've come a long ways. And so this is my next video to try and help you guys, you know, put things in motion and give you what you guys need so that you guys can go do your jobs in the best possible way and safest possible way. And these people have no opportunity to walk away or walk free. They're caught, right? You know, the whole goal is that they're caught and they have no wiggle room anymore, and that's it. They're gone. They're dealt with, okay? So I got 20 seconds left on my clock, so I'm just saying, in Heavenly Father's name, Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, the angels out there, and every other entity in the heavenly realms, I'm praying to you guys and just asking for your guys' protection. And my prayer also goes to all the listeners out there who are on our side, that they can make it through this video, and then, walk away with it happy knowing that this is happening. So that's, and that's it. All right, so that was my prayer. Ran it all the way down to the clock, but it was more or less it was done. It was a pretty big prayer. So with that said, maybe I got your attention. And again, if you're brand new to this channel and you're somebody who has not watched all the videos, again, even though I might have your attention and have your curiosity, please follow instructions and have everything else on my channel. It's like a prerequisite. You need to have watched everything in chronological order, as if you're following a story or reading a book or watching a TV series. That way you know what's happening as you're learning this new information that I'm presenting. You have all this other stuff in your mind in the background, because again, I'm inviting you to pretend you are a detective. You might actually even be a detective. It'd be funny. So, if you're a viewer and you're part of law enforcement and your position is a detective, well, this is for you. You can enjoy it, because at the same time, if you remember from my first episode, I mentioned, when I worked for the Redmond Police Department from the age 18, 19, and 20. So that was 2006 through 2008. I ended up going to 2 different law enforcement competitions on the Oregon coast. I was competing with a whole bunch of different cadets and explorers who were my age. And so they just had all these different scenarios and stuff out there that, that they're like real world scenarios that law enforcement officers encounter. But, this is a competition, so everything's all staged and there's judges and all that. Well, where I'm going with this is one of the years, I think it was my first year when I went to the competition. One of the trophies I brought home is a 3rd place trophy, but out of over 100, I think, I don't even know, 100, 125, 150 participants, I got a 3rd place trophy in crime scene investigating. So that's not a brag or anything. It's just, I do have experience with law enforcement. I still remember all of those experiences from back then, and it was a lot of fun. I have good memories of that back then, and there's good memories with the other officers that I worked with that gave myself and the other cadets that I was with, gave us our training. We got firearms training. We got all kinds of training before we even went to the competition. And then once we were there, we had the experience, and then we gotta put our experience and our training in action, competing against all the other cadets. And there's all different types of events, and whoever scored the highest in each event, you brought home trophies. So I talked about this in my first episode, which is, that's something, if you know about me, okay, well, I do have a little bit of history in law enforcement, and I also briefly explained my reasons for leaving and walking away. Okay, so at the same time, remember, I have that experience, and then also don't forget my grandpa, my father, my dad's father. So my father's name is Jerry, and so his father was chief of police in Redmond for like 30 years. Okay, so during my childhood, my grandpa was still alive, but he had retired from the he was no longer chief of police while I was a child, right? And then at some point he started working like airport security, just so he had something to do. And then I think he ended up passing on in his mid-70s. So I was, I don't know, I was probably only like 10 or 12 years old. I'm not really sure. I can't remember exactly how old I was when my grandpa passed on, but I actually watched him die. He's the only person who I've ever actually watched die, but myself and my entire family was in attendance when he took his last breath. And so I was there when I watched my grandpa die on his bed. And then I also remember his funeral. His funeral was a pretty big event. My grandpa's funeral, he had state police, county, and local police, fire trucks, ambulances. It was like one giant big escort, like convoy, that this giant emergency service escorted his casket all the way to to where he was buried, right? And so he also had a 21 gun salute, I imagine. He had a 21 gun salute, if from what I remember. I think it's 21 shots, so it was like a military style funeral, but also law enforcement and firefighters and paramedics were in attendance. Okay. So this is something that I have in my background, that's as far as my grandpa. And then there's my uncle, who is retired state police, okay? And then there's my dad, and to this day, I don't even, at face value, he was a construction worker, but beyond face value, over these past years, what I've caught on to is that my dad has been connected to other things in the background, okay? As a teenager, my dad always tried to push me to go into the FBI. I don't know why. My dad always tried telling me to go down that path. Never explained why. And then at the same time, he's always been obsessed with law enforcement. Like to this day, like he loves watching TV shows and movies that are based on law enforcement or SWAT or military or whatever. So he has this. Even though, as far as I'm aware, he's never worked inside law enforcement other than being a police reserve, like when he was younger, like probably when he was in his 20s, or I don't even know, but he was a police reserve when my grandpa was chief of police, and I don't think that lasted very long, and I don't know why. But ever since then, as far as I've been told, my dad has only been working in construction. Okay, that's as far as what I've been told. So, but here in these past few years, I've caught on that might not really be true. It might be, but there also might be a lot more in the background, as if there's some type of big family secrets that I've never been told about. As far as my last name is Durgan, Brandon Durgan. As far as the Durgan family, as far as my dad and my dad's brother and sister, and then my grandma and grandpa, I have no idea what's actually been going on, as far as there might be some type of big secrets. And again, it wasn't up until around the time Dan came into the equation, and then everything that happened after I encountered Dan and met him and crossed paths with him. And so this is kind of where we're going to be going with this video, okay? I'm going to be trying to connect a bunch of pieces for you guys to help you guys see how Dan and Jerry might have been very well connected before I ever even crossed paths with Dan. And then I'm going to be explaining a lot of really messed up stuff that has happened since crossing paths with Dan. And so I got my dry erase board, and I've already written out a little bit, just kind of to save time. Okay, it's after this take or something, I'm going to be repositioning the camera, and I'll be sitting on the floor again. Marker. And I've kind of, if you've watched all my videos, you've not, one of the videos I shared like within the past month or something, it was titled like "Where Are We Going?" So I kind of already a little bit kind of drew out this timeline. And if you remember what I said, like as far as everything I've shared on my YouTube channel, like episodes 1 through 5, episodes 1 through 5, Welcome to the Rabbit Hole, all the way to the Forked Road. That was essentially those first 5 episodes, it was essentially reading, like it was nothing but reading, right? And so that essentially covered like this part of the timeline. So I'm using from 2014 to 2025. This is the timeline that we're sticking with. It doesn't, there's always stuff I can talk about before then, but it's irrelevant right now. Okay. So far as everything I've shared on my YouTube channel, if you can remember, I've already covered all this. And then after episodes 1 through 5, I started speaking on camera again, where rather than writing and then you reading, I was speaking for you to listen, right? So it's a matter of you being able to listen and retain the story, the information I've given you since then, right? So it's been, we're on 6.5 months inside my van right now. So this is, at the end of January, this is going to be the completion of month number 7 of being in the van, right? So, and so far in this, almost 7 months time, I have told you all the way, where I really kind of stopped. I got all the way up to right here, okay? I got all the way up to right here, March 2018, and that's, if you can recall those episodes, The Devil's House, Part 1 and 2. When I shared The Devil's House, Part 1 and 2, some pretty crazy stuff happened in Wyoming, right? And so, because of things that happened in Wyoming, I ended up driving all the way back to Central Oregon to talk to my mom and kind of figure out what's going on, because some really messed up stuff happened in Wyoming, and I'm not really going to talk about it right now. I might be getting there in this episode or later on, but not at the current moment. But with what happened in Wyoming, there were things that were connected with Jerry, my dad, and I wasn't sure what was actually going on, and I drove all the way back home to Central Oregon because I thought he might have been arrested. When I went home, I didn't even know if Jerry was going to be home, and I thought he had been arrested based off things that happened. But when I got home, he was still walking free, which was kind of a mind fuck for me. But I'm just saying, so where, as far, the whole point of mentioning that is, if The Devil's House, Part 1 and 2, that's, I was in the process of, I was in the process of telling you guys about my story, and then again, shit happened when I started telling you guys about this. So essentially, this is kind of where we have left off. That's where I kind of left off. And then after, think about all the videos and content that I have shared since those videos, The Devil's House Part 1 and 2. Just look and see all of the videos that I've shared since then. Well, since then, I've kind of just been telling you little bits of out of all of it, I've told you little bits and fragments about stuff that's, kind of happened here and there about little things, but nothing really for you to connect the pieces. With exception to all the information have given you with this, a lot of the amount of time that I've given you that's not talking about this part, I've really just been focused on some pretty serious stuff that's happened right here, just to let you guys know what my current situation is, and telling you why I'm in my van, right? So, the direction we're going with this video, it's essentially we're going to be backtracking, and we're kind of going to be continuing from right here, but I'm not going to be telling you everything. There's specific information I'm going to be sharing with you that will really be helping you connect other things. So especially, if again I'm talking to you as if you're law enforcement, well, I'm aware that law enforcement knows a lot right now. They know a lot more than I do as far as all these things that are happening in the background. And so I'm kind of like I'm trying to help give law enforcement some missing pieces, and also to put this on camera, kind of like a testimony, or if you were to imagine like sitting in a courtroom, and you're sitting up on a podium giving your testimony in front of a judge and jury. Well, I don't know what's going to happen to me by telling you guys all of this information. Again, I could get this all recorded, and I could get it all uploaded and everything, but again, I might get murdered by the bad guys as a product of this. And so I'm giving you guys my testimony just in case that happens, right? Where, say, if I end up getting murdered and I'm gone, you at least have all this on video, and it's not just hearsay. It's not just hearsay. It's me actually speaking and trying to paint the picture for you, right? So that's the whole point of me doing this. And again, I'm just speaking to law enforcement. I'm trying to help you guys and give you guys what you need so you can go after these people, right? So I'm going to be picking up right here, letting you know pretty much picking up from where we left off. But again, I'm going to be a big portion of this conversation. I'm going to be talking about magic mushrooms, and kind of where my usage of magic mushrooms has started. You know, so my usage of magic mushrooms started when I met Dan. Okay, when I met Dan in Las Vegas. You know, that's also when I did DMT, right? But also at the same time, I also got access to magic mushrooms. Like, a lot of it. Like, I had, like, pretty much, as long as I had the money, I could get mushrooms whenever I wanted. And I actually really liked mushrooms, so that turned into a thing, which turned into other things. Right, and so I have to, considering where we're at now, again, you see I have magic mushrooms written here for 2024. Well, these two, they go hand in hand. There's a whole lot going on, and so I'm trying. This video is going to be helping you make these connections, and it's really going to come down to, yeah, you better have watched all my other videos so you understand how this universe works. Understand that there are things out in this world that our eyes cannot see because they're operating on a different frequency, so therefore they are invisible to human perception and our senses. We can't see them, but they're around, and they're listening, and they're watching. And this is where, you know, are you a believer or a non-believer? Do you believe in God and the devil? Do you believe in the heavenly realms and, you know, Satan and the fallen angels and demons and shit? Do you believe in God and archangels and the angels and guardian angels and warrior angels? And do you believe in all this other shit? And this is where spiritual warfare is going to come into the equation. You know, so all of the other things I've talked about are going to come into the equation in the context of you as the viewer being able to make sense of anything and then being able to identify where the source of our problems are coming from. There's a lot of layers to this. What we see with our eyes is only a fragment of everything that's actually going on out there. There's all types of stuff that's happening around us. Wherever you're at, there's a lot of stuff happening around you, just as much as there's a lot of stuff happening around me that my eyes can't see and your eyes can't see. But just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. And I've already talked about this before. As an example, your Wi-Fi connection. You can't see your Wi-Fi energy. You know, you're getting Wi-Fi on your laptop or your phone. You can't see the energy traveling from your phone to whatever relay tower. Okay, so that's the example. Your eyes can only see a limited amount. Okay, so where magic mushrooms and DMT come into the equation is, okay, well, when I tapped into this stuff and started consuming DMT, I mean, I have not touched DMT since 2019. So anybody, you know, when I'm talking about DMT, don't think I'm still doing DMT now. I haven't touched DMT since 2019, so it's been 6 years, okay? But I still remember a lot about DMT. But that does not, also at the same time, that doesn't hold true about magic mushrooms. Magic mushrooms have still been and continue to be in my life, okay? But where I'm going with this is, when I got access to DMT and magic mushrooms through Dan, okay, through Dan, that's where it all started. When I started consuming them, that's when I started tapping into frequencies, dimensions, realities, entities, other beings, things that I didn't even know existed up until that point. I just had no idea this stuff was out there. Okay, and once I did tap into this stuff and became aware that it existed, that's when I also became aware of, like, good versus evil. I started becoming aware of not everybody's my friend, and I started becoming aware of all the evil, sadistic, messed up stuff that is happening in this reality. Not just what we can see with our eyes, but I was also tapping into things that were happening that our eyes can't even see, but it still affects our reality in different ways. for whatever reason, just me being me, the inner me, when I do tap into these other frequencies and realities, these entities that are on the other side, these entities that are on the other side, they know who I am. I mean, I've already established who I am, and so it's just a matter of you seeing me, or you don't, accepting it, or you don't. But I've said who I am, and I'm letting you know that I have tapped into these places, and I've encountered entities, angels. I've even encountered Heavenly Father. I've literally had direct conversation with Heavenly Father. I've gone that far. Okay, I've met archangels. Okay, so I've tapped into these places and have established communication with these entities on the other side, and they have let me know that I'm not, like, they're not against me. Like, they're trying to help me. They're trying to make me, not only become aware of myself and who I am, but own it. To own it, not be ashamed of it, but own it and show people, just by existing, just by surviving, just by walking through this very scary gauntlet that I've gone down over all these years. If I can survive it, well, then maybe after all this time, people might start believing. It didn't, even back then, when I declared myself a couple times back then before my arrest, but that was right at the beginning. There was still so much I had so much more to learn. And then anybody who did hear me declare myself, well, they either didn't believe it because of how outrageous that was, but at the same time, it's kind of like, prove it, bro. It's kind of like a thing, if you are who you say you are, prove it. Okay, well, all of these crazy messed up things have happened. 7 years later, I met Dan in 2018. Here we are, January 2025. So it's been almost 7 full years. 7 years of trials, tribulations, tests, all kinds of messed up shit. And the fact that I'm still alive, maybe, just maybe, people, I already know I have people who believe me. I've encountered people who know who I am, and they've very discreetly revealed themselves and just communicating with me to let me know that they're around and they're protecting me, which is a big reason why I feel confident in getting on camera and sharing this. Again, I'm in a big battle right now. This is spiritual warfare, big battle, and I'm in the middle of it, and I have, both sides are fighting over me. One side's fighting to protect me and keep me alive. Therefore, I can continue sharing this information. Therefore, with this information shared, putting things in motion, doors being opened, law enforcement and military can now see things that they might not have been able to see before, or now can have access to things that have been denied to them, and now they can see the bigger picture, and they can see who the bad people are and what they're doing and what their agendas are. Or now people are being given the opportunity to make the right choice. They can make the right choice and start helping me, and we can all confront this corruption together. Or they can just, everybody can just turn their backs on me and come after me. Either way, I don't know what's going to happen as a product of this, but the fact that I'm still alive right now, it's kind of, I've said who I was in the past, and then I've survived everything that they've thrown at me. So, if you haven't believed me in the past, maybe you'll believe me now. And I'm just saying, magic mushrooms and DMT, magic mushrooms, DMT, these have all just, it's not, yeah, you can consider it a drug, but what else is a drug? Sugar is a drug. Pharmaceutical prescriptions are drugs. Everything, pretty much a lot of things that people don't even consider drugs are drugs. And then also, if we look at drug and the word medicine, okay, well, when do we start drawing that line? What's a drug and what's a medicine? Are the two the same, or are they two different things? Okay, well, and then you start looking at drugs that are created by a pharmaceutical corporation versus something you call a drug that naturally grows from the earth, like a mushroom. How many species of mushrooms are there out in the world? And then how many of those species are psychedelic? And then how many of those species are also medicinal? You got psychedelic slash medicinal mushrooms who people call drugs, but at the same time they have no problem swallowing pills and they call that medicine. Okay, so this is where, depending on your indoctrination and your awareness, okay, a lot of things in this world, a lot of things that are good for you, because this world is corrupt and messed up and has been hijacked, the things that are actually good for you, they're either outlawed and illegal, and they're called bad, and then the things that are actually bad for us, they're being pushed into society, and you're being told to consume these things, even if they have bad consequences. So in this reality, a lot of the things that are considered good are bad, and a lot of things that are bad are actually good. So everything's all flippy floppy, and it's up to you as the individual to have the discernment and the critical thinking skills to figure out the difference between the two. And so from my perspective, after everything that I have encountered and all of my experiences, I have learned that mushrooms are a medicine and they're not a drug. So whatever people's perspective or opinion on it is, well, that's just their own perspective and opinion. So I'm going to be going somewhere with this, and it's just remember, you just got to be patient. Whatever your opinion is, just, think about it, but at the same time, just remember, you got to slow down, put yourself back in a neutral state, and allow me to expand upon what I'm claiming. And before we continue, I'm also, when I say mushrooms are a medicine, yes, they can heal you in many different ways, but also at the same time, mushrooms are very fucking dangerous. Hey, I mean, if you've never consumed mushrooms, I'm letting you know right now, do not just go out looking for mushrooms wherever you live. Don't go out into the woods or random places looking for random mushrooms and then start eating them hoping that they're psychedelic. You got, first and foremost, a lot of mushrooms are fucking toxic and they will kill you if you eat them. They'll just outright kill you. They will do some serious damage to your internal organs and they will kill you. So unless you know what you're consuming, don't even try it. Okay? Don't even try it, because next thing you know, you could die. You just outright die. Or have permanent fucking damage. Maybe you don't die, but maybe the hospital, the doctors and stuff save your life, but you create permanent damage to your body because of whatever you ate. You don't even know what you ate, but you heard about magic mushrooms, and then you got on the internet and looked it up, try to figure out if you could identify them, and then you went out into the woods and you found some mushrooms that look close to what you saw on the internet, but because you're not, you don't know the difference, even though you think you might know the difference, you can end up dying. Okay? So that's very dangerous in itself. And then also at the same time, even if you do get your hands on psychedelic mushrooms, who did you get them from? And what's that person's background? If that person is connected to connected to some criminals, or it's all just some criminal activity and you're getting it through some criminal organization, and now they know you and they followed where you went, and these are where things can get scary. If you put yourself under a heavy dose of mushrooms or a medium dose of mushrooms, and you are surrounded by people that you might think they're your friend, but they might not be your friend. Mushrooms are not a party drug. If you do mushrooms and you're surrounded by a lot of people, you're probably not going to have a good trip. You're probably going to you're going to have sensory overload, and whatever stimulus you have going on around you, it's going to become overwhelming, and if you'd have no place to go, you'll probably have a fucking bad trip and have like a mental breakdown, because once you do start the mushrooms, you're on the ride until your body processes the psilocybin and it burns off. So if you're not in a safe environment and you're surrounded by people that are not necessarily your friend, you can put yourself in a very dangerous spot. And then at the same time, if you're surrounded by people and then you start tripping and you want to get out of there and you just take off out the door, your front door, and just take off down the block, you don't know where you're going to go. You could end up 5 miles down the road on foot, and then you don't know how you got there because you can't remember. Anything can happen from that destination to the point where you kind of come back to yourself and you don't even know how you got there. So these are very scary and real things when we're talking about psychedelics. And yes, there are legitimate reasons for them to be illegal, but at the same time, it just depends on who you are and what your experience is with them, and if you know how to keep your shit together while you're on them. It's a big thing of, and at the same time, mushrooms and, psychedelics, mushrooms and DMT, specifically those two. I haven't experimented with anything else, as far as my history with drugs, it's, mushrooms, DMT, and marijuana. Like, I've done Molly twice when I was like 25. I did that at a Sasquatch music festival, but I would not recommend anything else. Molly can become very addictive. Fortunately for me, I never got addicted to it because I've never even had access to it. It was just a spontaneous experience. It was really an amazing experience. But after coming down from Molly, the withdrawals where the cravings of wanting to do it again because of how awesome it was, I could see that it could become a very dangerous thing if you're somebody who has access to like Molly or like cocaine or heroin. Those are all things, with exception to doing Molly twice, all these other drugs and pills and stuff out there. I've made it my own life rule to never touch any of these things. But at the same time, I have no issue. For me, I mean, other people have issues, but for me, I have no qualms with marijuana. Marijuana is not an issue. It's an herb. It comes from a seed, it grows from a plant, right? Mushrooms, magic mushrooms, for me, it's natural. It grows from the earth, okay? And then, DMT, well, DMT can be harvested from the bark of a specific type of tree, okay? It just has to be synthesized in a specific way and stuff. So things that are these natural things, those three specifically, I have no issue with for me. But that's not me turning around telling you to turn around and do it, because again, DMT and mushrooms can be very fucking dangerous. And if you are not in spiritual alignment, you don't even acknowledge God, you don't acknowledge Jesus, you don't acknowledge the angels, you don't acknowledge nothing, and you might just be an outright devil worshiper or Satanist, or maybe you don't even acknowledge any of it, and you're just blindly consuming these substances. I'm saying something bad can happen to you. Before you even think about psychedelics, you really need to have gone through a process of becoming self-aware and figuring out who you are as a spirit, becoming aware of your spirit and going through a process of reviewing your life. Before I even had even touched psychedelics, I'd already encountered Heavenly Father and had reestablished connection with this high realm. And I was in the process of finding my true self and looking for the bigger answers. So when I did tap into psychedelics, these entities were ready to receive me and start sharing this information because I was ready. I was ready to start learning about what else is out there. But at the same time, there's nothing they can't share everything with you in a short. They can only share so much with you in a short window. Like, for example, with DMT, depending on how much you smoke, your ride is only going to be anywhere from like 10 minutes to like half an hour. For me, because of who I am, the entities can decide how long they want to keep you. For most people, DMT will only last 10 to 20 minutes. But it's not saying that's a definite answer. My first DMT ride went over an hour. And I've done multiple DMT rides that have gone half hour, 45 minutes, around an hour. So there's only so much that these entities can share with you in these time spans. Even though these places that you go, time is not the same, you're still on a time frame. They can only share so much with you. And then when you do come back to reality, the next challenge is how much can you retain and remember, and then whatever you can retain and remember, are you actually going to do something positive with it to improve your life, and then maybe even turn around and start helping people with their own problems. So when you say, if you're somebody who has done DMT once or you've done mushrooms once, dude, you're just getting started. That's not even the tip of the iceberg. You're just getting a glimpse of something that might actually be out there. And that's where it comes into an individual having the courage and also being in spiritual alignment to where you have the blessings of these entities on the other side, where if you do decide to do mushrooms again or DMT, that they will be happy to receive you and share more information with you. But again, they can only share so much, and you're only going to remember so much. So long as you're willing to keep coming back, they will share more. And so when I said DMT, it's only 15, 20 minutes or whatever. Well, mushrooms, it's less intense. I mean, depending on the type of mushroom you have and the dosage, you can have a mushroom ride that is just as intense as a DMT ride, except with the mushrooms, that's like depending on if you drink tea where you drink it or if you consume it as an eat the mushroom, that can be anywhere from like a 3-hour to like a 6-hour experience. And if you're not somebody you're not spiritually aligned and you've been doing bad stuff, well, that could be a 3 to 6 hour nightmare. Or if you're on the right frequency and you're doing them for the right reasons, that could be one of the 3 to 6 hours of the most life-changing thing you've ever experienced up until that point of your lifetime. Just one experience alone can literally change your life. But again, that's not saying you're getting all the answers. So again, if you remember the other videos I've shared, I've consumed from 2018 to around August 2019, I did DMT 25 times. But altogether with magic mushrooms from this period of time, and then from 2022 to 2024, combined, I've probably done mushrooms around 150 times, plus or minus. Okay, that's 150 times stepping up to the plate, willing to make myself vulnerable to surrender, put myself in my physical body in a vulnerable position where anything can happen, and to allow these frequencies and these entities to communicate with me and enlighten me about how this universe works, and everything else, anything you can imagine. Like, I have experienced a lot. I've experienced the heavenly realm. I've experienced a lot of stuff going on around here that's essentially invisible to us. And I've also tapped into the lower realm, so I know what's down there. I've gone all over the place. Right? If I had the opportunity, I could just tell you stories upon stories upon stories of the different types of mushroom rides and DMT trips just my experiences on these other frequencies and these different dimensions and these other entities that I've encountered and communicated with. And when I'm talking about them now, that doesn't mean it was a past event and that they're no longer around. Well, no, as I'm speaking right now, telling you about them, they're still around. They can hear me talking, and which also means at the same time, I've talked about this before, for you as the viewer, remember, you probably have an angel or some type of invisible entity near you, and they are monitoring your thoughts right now. They're wanting to know if you're finding this information fascinating and you're getting on my side and you want me to keep going, and this is all empowering you, letting you know that this universe might actually be pretty fucking cool. But in the same breath, we do have a really severe problem. We have some really bad individuals out there they're trying to murder me, and then if they murder me, they're trying to enslave all of you, your mind, body, and soul. Whether they turn you into a debt slave, a sex slave, a prison slave, a wage slave, whatever. If they can, their goal is to make you one of their slaves in whatever category they can. It doesn't really matter, but once you're their slave, you essentially become a farm animal for them to harvest your energy. Right? These bad individuals who are out there, they're like energy vampires. They're demons. They're fallen angels. Satan, Lucifer. They're very fucking wicked. And they also have a bunch of minions, human people that have sold out You know, they got baited in by the Satan, and they sold their soul in exchange for money, for fame, for a position of authority within the government system or within corporations or whatever. So this is a very large scale thing where you have a lot of people out there who have literally sold out, and they're willing to watch all of the good people in the world, including your children. You know, if you're not one of them and you consider yourself one of the good people, you consider yourself a Christian, you consider yourself a believer in Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ and angels, okay? So you just gotta, you just gotta understand, there are a lot of individuals out there who are willing to watch, if you, say you're a Christian and you believe in Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ and the angels and, all the good things, you believe in God's creation, all that. And also at the same time, you're aware that there's a lot of individuals in this reality who have turned their back on God and the heavenly realms, and they've essentially sold out to materialism. They've sold out for money, material things, fame, fortune, and all, whatever, drugs, sex. They're willing to hurt good people in order to elevate their own position. And so this is where, everything gets really, really messed up in this reality. And I've really learned a lot about what's happening through mushrooms. And it's been these entities that have been communicating with me. And the whole purpose is for me to turn around and share it with you guys. I've gone to some very scary places. I've encountered some very scary individuals who should be in prison, but they're not right now. And so, because of the places that I've gone and things that have happened, there's been a lot of people who have been lied to, and they perceive me as the bad guy. Or they perceive me as psychologically unstable or schizophrenic. Or they perceive me as a danger to society. Okay, so there's a lot of people who are confused, and that's understandable, because you have bad guys out there who are spreading that confusion. That's their goal is to make you guys perceive me as being somebody who's batshit crazy. While at the same time, they're essentially all they're doing is trying to divert all of your attention directly onto me, while they kind of like scurry away and go hide in the background or hide in the shadows, where you just forget about them or don't pay any attention to what they did that put me in my position. They did some really fucked up stuff, which caused a whole bunch of, like pushing over a bunch of dominoes, it caused a whole bunch of things to happen. And at the same time, I didn't know what was going on because nobody was telling me. And at the same time, I had people threatening to murder me. I had a whole bunch of shit. And I had nobody. This is where, again, if you remember back then, I was all over the place. And everybody back then, everybody thought back then. Sorry, there's a lot of road noise. A lot of people back then in this time frame, they thought that I had just outright lost my fucking mind. And it's very understandable, and I don't blame you if you're somebody who was there, and there's a lot of reasons for people to think that that was true. And also at the same time, I knew what was happening, and I was trying to point my finger. I was like, you guys, they did some shit to me, man. They did some fucked up stuff, and I need your help. Right? So it got pretty bad. Right? Again, I hit rock bottom when I was locked up. Remember, in September 2019 to September 2020, that's when I was locked up. And so that was a very dark period of my life where I hit rock bottom. It was, I was contemplating my own suicide for many months. And all of that was a product of Dan, and then, that was March 2018, and then January 2019, you had Kelly, when I went to Eureka, California. Well, a lot of bad stuff happened inside her house while I was visiting her and her boyfriend, or whatever their relationship was. I don't know, but some really weird, messed up stuff happened in their house. And once I witnessed these things with my own eyes and started catching on to what might be going on in the background, that I was not in a safe place and that these were not good people, well, I tried running. I didn't run. I just I separated and got away from them, and that's when I started turning around trying to let people know that this individual is not who she claims to be, and she's tricking a lot of you to make you perceive that she's somebody who's good, but she's really, really not. And when I was locked up, I learned a lot of stuff about this individual that I didn't previously know, and I learned about her through different inmates. You know, while I was locked up in Humboldt County, well, the locals, you know, the inmates in Humboldt County, they're from the area, and some of them knew who Kelly was, and some of them told me what she was connected to, and they couldn't believe that I had did what I did, you know, as far as, you know, me driving all the way to California, and I'm not, you know, I threw a rock through a window and started a fire on her porch. Kind of like there's like an adult version of a bag full of dog shit that you just light the bag on fire and leave it on the dog porch, or leave it on the porch, you know, for somebody to come forward and stomp out. Well, I did the adult version of that. It was just a little bit more scary, and then I threw a rock through her window. But that was because, you know, if you remember, I've mentioned it before, the week before I went to Eureka and did that, I had received a message from somebody, some random person on Instagram who private messaged me, who told me they were part of Kelly's inner circle. They didn't identify who they were. They just told me they were part of Kelly's inner circle, and they told me that Kelly and her friends had been holding somebody as a hostage. Somebody with a little dog. They had been holding, I don't know if it was a woman or a man, I have no idea. But they said they'd been holding somebody hostage, and they just executed that person and that person's little dog, and then they were passing pictures around on some type of group chat. I mean, I don't know what platform, but they were passing stuff, or passing pictures around of somebody they murdered through a group chat. And so because her and her friends had already threatened my life, and I had people stalking me outside of my parents' house back in Redmond. You know, this is before my arrest, right? Before my arrest in September 2019, I had literally had people stalking me outside of my parents' house, taking pictures of my vehicle, uploading it on the internet, or sending those pictures probably to Kelly or one of her friends, and then they were turning around and uploading those pictures on the internet and tagging my name so that I would see them, and they're just let me know they're nearby. So I had received threats where they had threatened to murder me, threatened to murder my dog. They threatened to cut off my head and pee on my dead body. I wasn't able to screen grab that one. They sent the threat, and then it got deleted before I could screen grab it, so I didn't catch it. So, but I have a whole bunch of things that I'm planning to share. After a couple weeks ago, I made it back to, you know, I'm back in Oregon now, right? And on my way through Oregon, I stopped in Central Oregon and caught up with my mom. I'm going to be explaining this stuff later in this video, but I ended up getting my old laptop and other old electronic devices that have you know, things from the past. And so I'm going to be sharing this stuff on the YouTube channel, as far as some of the messed up messages that I've received, some of the things I still have my hands on. It's just been, you know, it's been 6 years that I've been sitting on this stuff, but it's just been well preserved. You know, I've been trying to preserve it as best as I can for when the time came I could start talking about it again, and which is around now, you know. So remember, this is kind of just like a starting point. And this video, I'm really, it's just going to be a matter of I kind of just have to start at the beginning a little bit, and then just kind of just move my way forward. But again, the main focus is I'm going to be spending a lot of time talking about magic mushrooms, but at the same time, the whole point of letting you know about my usage of magic mushrooms and what I've been up to for the past year and a half, and in the context with magic mushrooms. The whole point of telling you about the magic mushrooms is to essentially tell you about things that are happening in the background, where you have Dan, Kelly, and even my own father, Jerry, where between the three of them, And then whoever, whatever friends they all have, like the giant web, there's a giant web. But I'm just saying, as far as connections, these three are connected in different, to what extent and capacity, I don't have those answers, but law enforcement might very well have those answers. But again, I'm just speaking on camera as a testimony in case something happens to me in the next few weeks or month and I end up getting murdered. I'm just on camera, I'm just establishing these three are connected, and you could easily find the truth to that simply by, investigating all of their cell phone history, all their different cell phones over the years, whatever phone numbers that they've had, in social media accounts that they've had. If you can track all of it, you can find a lot of conversations, things that got buried a long time ago, and you can essentially put all this stuff together. Law enforcement and military might have already done all that. As far as I'm aware, they might already be on top of everything. But for you as a viewer, if you're not law enforcement or military and you're acting as the detective, as I invited you to be, before, as we continue proceeding forward, the key focus of this video, of this next 6 to 10 hours or whatever, I'm just going to be showing you how Dan, Kelly, and Jerry are connected, and then the big fuss and the big issue with the magic mushrooms. It's all connected. It's not not separate. It's all connected, and it gets pretty complex, and it gets pretty dangerous and sadistic too. So that's where we're going. I'm gonna need to take a break, get some water, and then kind of reset my brain. I'm gonna wipe all this down. But just for you as a viewer, it might be, if you have not watched The Devil's House Part 1 and 2, and you haven't watched the video about my first DMT trip, and you haven't watched the video about how I ended up in Las Vegas, well, before you even really proceed forward, even though I've told you that you shouldn't be watching, if you haven't watched those videos, well, you need to stop this video and watch those, so you kind of have so you know what has happened, so I don't have to repeat myself, right? And then at the same time, if you watch those videos but you don't remember, maybe stop now, go watch those if you want to, and then you can proceed forward from here. It's up to you, but I'm gonna stop and take a little bit of a break, and then we'll continue. Okay? All right. So it's been about 45 minutes since I cut. I needed to take a break, and I repositioned the van somewhere else. So the lighting's different right now. There are so many things that I could say, and it's like, from my position, it's really hard to choose like a starting point. It's really difficult for me to just start from somewhere and then go, because for you as the viewer, you're not me, and you don't know the experiences I've gone through. So I have to be very mindful of trying to be as clear and easy to understand as I possibly can, but at the same time, it's really just up to you if you can figure it out or you can't. There's a million different ways I can try painting the same picture, but it's really up to you to put it together or you don't, Meaning, so where am I going now, and where do I even choose to start? How am I going to even proceed forward? Well, remember, the focus is on those three people I named. You got Dan, Kelly, and Jerry. And you might not know who they are, but those are names. Those are characters that if you know who they are, okay, those are people that you can identify. If you have no idea who they are, well, just look at them as characters in a story and just see if you can solve the mystery, like you're a detective, okay? But just remember, these are real people. As far as I'm aware, they're very evil, and they're not good. They're murderers. They have no issue murdering people or removing people from reality. So they're very dangerous. So again, I'm putting my life on the line to get this information out to you, so that, if you are law enforcement or military, I'm hoping to give you what you need so you can help me get to the bottom of this, so we can find some type of resolution so that all the good people out there can go live their lives in peace without having to worry about criminals in the background doing bad things and then getting away with it. No matter how messed up it is, the bad guys, they feel like they can do anything and get away with it without any type of consequences. And me doing what I'm doing, putting my life on the line, is just calling them out, letting them know that yes, there are consequences, and if you guys do murder me, well, you're gonna pay for it. I'm willing to put my life on the line, having full faith, knowing that if they end up murdering me, they're gonna pay for it dearly. So whether they murder me or they don't murder me, I don't know. We'll see what happens. But either way, I'm holding my ground, standing my ground, having no issues confronting these individuals, pointing my finger at them, therefore opening these doors, allowing law enforcement and military to proceed forward and go after them, knowing that, I'm doing this for you guys. I'm putting my life on the line to give you guys the opportunity to hold these people accountable for what they've done. And just the fact that I'm still alive, they probably have law enforcement and military probably has a mountain of evidence of all of the people who are involved, who can be linked together from the smallest ways to directly involved with these bad things happening to good, innocent people and their families and friends, and my own situation too. We're just trying to connect all these tethers together and identify who is involved directly and who's involved indirectly. It's a big thing, okay? So how do I start with that? Well, again, if you've watched The Devil's House Part 1 and 2, that's where essentially I left off with my story. As far as through the timeline, I was trying to go in chronological order, telling you about the direction my life was going. And I left off with The Devil's House Part 1 and 2, which was essentially I was introducing Dan into my story, and I was giving you some background information about Dan's life so that you can have that in your mind, knowing that this is the individual who I was spending time with and who has since been lurking in the background, pulling the strings and doing stuff that have significantly been affecting my life in a negative way. But everything he's doing, he's trying to do it in the background to where there's no evidence or anything for anybody to point saying that it's him. In the same situation with my father Jerry and Kelly, between the three of them, everything they've been doing, they've been using other people like puppets on strings or pawns on the chessboard to do their bidding for them. And then that way there's no concrete evidence for me or anybody investigating this to pin it on Dan, Jerry, or Kelly, or all three of them. They've been between these three, they've been doing everything in their power to avoid any type of accountability. But at the same time, they're connected to these tethers that I've introduced to you, these spiritual tethers. And I've told you about Heavenly Father and the angels and archangels, and there's a whole lot of entities that our eyes cannot see, that they have the ability to see the web, and they can tap into the information, anything that they want. And anybody that's connected to the web, they can go find you out in the world. They can tap into your brain and go through your mind and your memories and figure out the truth of what involvement what have you participated in? What's the truth? What were you involved with, or whatever? What happened to you? How did you get involved? All these different questions. They can go into your brain and tap into this, and they can figure out if you're a good person and you just got put in a bad situation, or if you consciously chose to do bad things to try and get away with stuff, and so you're evil and wicked. These entities can figure out wherever you are, if you're connected to the web. I mean, if you're watching this video, obviously you're connected to the web, right? So whoever you are, if you're not one of my friends and you're one of my haters, and you're watching my video, you are therefore, by default, you're connected to the web, which means as you're watching this video, there are entities your eyes can't see that are, they're listening to your thoughts. And they know exactly who you are. So depending on what you do with this information, they will respond accordingly, or they might just sit back and watch you and just see where you go, and what you do with the knowledge that you're being watched, So I'm just letting you know that this is a thing. Doesn't matter who you are. There are lots of these entities out there just quietly monitoring everybody, figuring out which side of the fence you're on. Okay? So there's that. I'll never forget about that. Right? And so where we're going now, I'm going to be focusing on, as far as the timeline, what I'm going to be talking about right now, as far as a starting point. We're really going to be focusing on from where I left off, The Devil's House Part 1 and 2, where I introduced Dan and gave you a little bit of information about his background, right? Just so you know who I was spending time with March and April of 2018. And then we eventually crossed paths again. It was like February or March of 2019. So almost 1 year later, about 1 year later, March 2019, cross paths with Dan again. I'll just write Dan, write his name again. So, just so you know, as far as this is the last time I've ever seen him face to face. But that doesn't mean he's gone, right? That doesn't mean he's not paying attention or watching what's going on or trying to interfere or stop what's happening so he can retain the secrets and the control. Just because I haven't seen him for a while doesn't mean he's not out there creating mischief, right? Same with Jerry and Kelly. So, but right now, this is kind of where we're at right now. March 2018 was when I met Dan. Okay, so before we even proceed forward, I need to when we're talking about connections and tethers. Okay, before I even arrived in Las Vegas, where I was house sitting, just look at me in Central Oregon, February 2018. I was house sitting for the entire month of February for my previous employer. Okay, so for the entire month, my employer, whom I was hanging Christmas lights for and taking Christmas lights down. Well, February we were taking lights down, but my employer and his entire family traveled to New Zealand for a vacation/business trip. And so for the entire month of February, I was home alone with my dog, house sitting for my employer. Okay, so while I was house sitting, I had no contact with my father, Jerry. So Jerry, him and I, we even before I had started house sitting that month, during January and December, my dad and I were always going back and forth, like always getting into arguments. And at that stage, back then in 2018, him and I weren't really talking. I went the entire month of February without talking to my father, right? But at the same time, I was finishing up on my seasonal job, and I had earned a lot of money, and I had my travel van, and so I was planning on a 2 or 3 month road trip from Oregon down to Arizona to Utah, Colorado, back to Utah, and eventually back to Oregon. That was my original itinerary, and I communicated that with my mom. Okay, so I'm gonna draw my mom right here. Okay, here's my mom. So I communicated that with my mom. However, I did not tell her about mushrooms. It wasn't until about halfway through February when I discovered DMT. Okay, when I discovered DMT and what DMT was, and then I discovered the person who was holding DMT and advertising it on social media, on Instagram. That was Dan. Dan started following my Instagram page before I even knew who Dan was. He just started following my Instagram page because if you remember, in February of 2018, that's when I really started going all out on Instagram with sharing information, things that I had been learning over the past couple of years as far as conspiracy theories or actual real stuff that's going on, just messed up stuff. I was starting to share things that I had been learning, and I started going all out February of 2018, which was the time that Dan started following my page. And if you watch those episodes, I described while I was house sitting, I started having a bunch of weird things happening around the house. For instance, I started getting text messages from random numbers that were just sending me these really creepy text messages that were kind of related to some of the stuff I was sharing on social media, like they were trolling me. Somebody was. And then at the same time, I mentioned that there were 2 separate nights while I was house sitting. When I had gone to bed, I woke up in the middle of the night with Malaki. He had left the bedroom and gone upstairs of the house to where the front door was, and I found the front door wide open in the middle of the night, even though I had locked the deadbolt that previous night. And then the following, like a few days later, the back door was wide open in the middle of the night, and Malaki let me know. So a whole bunch of weird stuff started happening in February 2018 before I'd even met Dan. Okay? But then mid-February, that's when I found DMT, discovered what it is, and then I started researching where I might be able to find it, and that's when Dan, as far as me logging into Instagram, and the homepage opens up, and the first thing I see on my Instagram page is somebody's hand, and they're holding like a petri dish or a little something, but it's DMT, like a petri dish full of DMT, and it was Dan who was holding it. And so therefore I contacted Dan through social media, not knowing who he is, just to ask him about it, if he could point me in the direction of somebody who I could buy it from, or if I could just directly buy it from him. And that opened up this door, this conversation between him and I, where he told me, yeah, he could hook me up with some DMT, but I have to drive to Las Vegas in order to get it. He was not willing to ship it to me. Well, if you remember, I did say I was planning on a trip, like a 2 or 3 month road trip down to Arizona. And from Central Oregon all the way down to Sedona, Arizona, if you get on Google Maps and type in the route, I think it's like the fastest route to get from Central Oregon to Sedona, Arizona, I literally drive past Las Vegas. Coincidence? I don't know. But all the same, it was what Dan was offering, saying if I stopped in Las Vegas, I could get DMT. Well, it was directly on my path, so it was not a big deal for me. As far as my mind, he was just a random person whom I would just stop, buy the substance, and then continue on my trip down to Arizona, where eventually, when I found a safe place where I was alone, a safe place, somewhere I felt comfortable, where I was safe and in a private area, I would try DMT for the first time and see what happened. That was my itinerary and my plan. And if I could find magic mushrooms through Dan, because after scrolling through his Instagram page, he had pictures of mushrooms on his page, magic mushrooms. And so therefore, in my mind, okay, well, cool, this guy not only has access to DMT and magic mushrooms, like he has, if he's not the one making it himself, he has connections. So all I got to do is show up in Las Vegas, and all I got to do is ask him, and then as long as I got the money, I should be able to just buy it and continue on my way. And, there we go. No biggie. Not, as far as my mind, not a big deal. Just a quick stop. Here we go. But I didn't communicate that part to my mom, right? I didn't tell my mom about any of that. All I did was tell her was that as soon as my employer and his family gets back from New Zealand, and therefore I don't have to be house sitting anymore. Well, as soon as they get back, I'm going to begin my own little vacation for 2 or 3 months. And all I did was tell my mom I'm going down to Arizona and Utah in my travel van with my dog. So I didn't communicate anything about mushrooms or DMT. So I communicated that with her, right? And then, okay, so when my employer came back from New Zealand, that it was time for me to leave. So that was at the end of February. It was like February 27th or 28th or somewhere right around there. So on the day that they returned is the day that I left their house and began it's like 1,500 miles from Central Oregon down to Sedona. I literally just drove that distance. Now that I'm in Oregon now, I just came back from Sedona. So it's around, so it's pretty long drive, right? So that as soon as my employer came back, that's the day that I left. Okay. I did, as far as, because I was having issues with my father, I wasn't even telling him nothing. I didn't even tell him. I wasn't letting him know when I was leaving. I hadn't let him know where I was going or nothing. So I'm gonna draw my dad right here. Okay. I'll just put Jerry. So whatever he learned about my trip, it probably came from my mom. So my mom communicated what my plan was with Jerry as far as going down to Arizona. Okay, well, if you also remember, I've mentioned before, when I actually did meet Dan and I did DMT at his house that first day, and then he invited me to stay the night at his house. And I stayed at his house for like 2 or 3 nights, and then I continued down to Arizona on like the 4th day. But my first night there, after doing DMT and agreeing to stay at Dan's, well, that night, him and we spent a lot of time just talking face to face, one-on-one. At some point during our conversation, that's when Dan mentioned that I had a hit on my life, that somebody had hired him, had hired Dan or something like that to assassinate me. And then that's when Dan explained that, because I had shown up at his house and not run away and had shown him respect rather than disrespecting him, and because I had done DMT at his house rather than doing DMT elsewhere, the hit was canceled. Okay, well, he mentioned that to me, and then that always just kind of made me scratch my head and wonder, well, who the hell, who wants me murdered? Why would somebody want me dead? What did I do? Other than speaking about stuff on Instagram, I haven't been doing anything in my life that would, really warrant somebody wanting to have me murdered. So that's kind of fucking weird. I don't really know. But all of a sudden, all the same, that information was put in my head. And because that's in my head, that's like a puzzle piece that was given to me where I start asking these other questions. And so then so now that, with that said, the day that I left Central Oregon, rewind, before I'd even met Dan. Okay, so, sorry, the clock is really annoying sometimes, that 20 minutes is not enough. But I'm saying, so, Dan mentioned that somebody had hired him, maybe, potentially, supposedly, to assassinate me, but the hit got canceled because of how I played it out, how I navigated my way through it, okay? Very dangerous, scary situation, but I made it through it. All the same, though, Dan told me all that, right? And then where I'm going with this is, well, we're going to have to rewind as far as I'm trying to help you, whoever you are as a viewer, I'm trying to help you make connections. The whole point is to help you make connections, and I'm trying to show you that Jerry and Dan may have already been previously connected before I even crossed paths with Dan. And where I'm saying, so after learning this about me having a hit on my life, something else from the past started making sense. And what I'm saying is, the day that I left Redmond, when I left Central Oregon and began driving down towards Las Vegas to meet Dan, well, remember, I had only told my mom I was heading to Arizona. I had not communicated with Jerry at all for the entire month of February. Okay, so as far as I was aware, they had no knowledge as far as my arrangements to stop in Las Vegas, meet this random person, buy DMT and mushrooms, and then continue on my journey down to Arizona. They had no knowledge as far as what I was aware of. But if I was being followed and monitored and all this was a setup, well, they knew if they were planning stuff and it was all this stuff was being orchestrated behind my back. Well, I'm going to draw Dan right here. So, Dan. And what I'm saying is, the day that I left to begin driving that very long distance through southeast Oregon and into Nevada and all of that. The day that I was driving through Redmond on my way out of town, Jerry called me. So there's a line. He calls me on the phone, on my cell phone, and he starts begging me not to go on my trip. Okay, he starts begging me not to go on my trip, and he starts apologizing for all kinds of things. I can't remember everything he said. I can't tell you everything he said, but all I remember is just the general conversation. But he's begging me not to go, but he's not telling me why. He's telling me he's sorry for a whole bunch of stuff, but he's not telling me why he's telling me he's sorry. He's asking me to stay and inviting me to come live with him and my mom, and saying that we can all work, try working things out. And the bottom line is he was begging me not to go and telling me that he was sorry. And that was kind of just messing with my head. Because remember, I hadn't met Dan yet. I had no idea who Dan was. I had no idea what was waiting for me. I was just planning my trip. I was just stopping at this person's place and going all the way down to Sedona. And Jerry's calling me, trying to stop me from going on my 2-month to 3-month adventure. I wanted to go explore the Southwest and go see some cool stuff with my dog and do a whole bunch of cool photography and stuff. And if I have psychedelics, well, it'd make the experience that much more fun, right? Maybe, hopefully. So, but he calls me and tells me all this stuff, and it kind of just weirds me out, right? But at the same time, that, I brush him off, tell him, no, I'm going to go on my trip. I've planned this entire trip. Haven't heard from you for a month, so whatever you got going on, well, you're on your own to figure it out, okay? So that night, that entire day, I just, this is very, very end of February, so it's winter time, so there's a lot of snow and stuff on the ground. It's really cold out, but I spent the entire day driving all the way to the southeast corner of Oregon, and where I stopped for the night. Okay, I stopped for the night, and then I slept in some parking lot at a church in this little agricultural town with my dog. It's just my dog and I. And that following morning, when I woke up and, as I fired up the van and we were just about to continue driving down the road, I got a text message from another one of those weird incomplete numbers. I got, just a random text message, and it was GPS coordinates, right? I mentioned this before in my other episodes, but I'm talking about it again because these are important things to remember. So I got a text message with GPS coordinates, and then that's weird, and it's from a random number, so I write down the GPS coordinates. I thought it was my position, but it wasn't. It ended up being my mom and dad's house. And so I ended up, if you remember me telling that story, so some random person sent me GPS coordinates of Jerry's house, and because I was getting weirded out about the whole situation, and I was weirded out about Jerry's phone call the previous day, I wasn't really sure what was going on, so I ended up I text Jerry, and I gave him a heads up about the text message, right? I gave him a heads up about the text message. Okay, so he starts acting like he's naive and starts freaking out about it, and he's asking me what I should do or what he should do, and I'm like, I have no idea. I'm just letting you know this is happening, and I'm just as weirded out about this as the phone call you gave me. But all the same, where I'm going with this, 3 days later, I continue driving, and eventually I make it to, or 2 days later, I ended up making it to Las Vegas, and that's when this connection was formed. But before this connection was formed, the big question is, how do I know these two had not already previously formed a connection at a different point in time? I don't know when. I have a suspicion, but I don't know when. But how do I know that Jerry and Dan have not known about each other for many years? How many years? I have no idea, but they have some type of connection. And they're friends maybe, I don't know. But I'm saying when, they had their connection formed before I had a connection formed with Dan. Which means when this connection was formed, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in the background that I had no knowledge of. Okay? So when I met Dan told me that he was the king of Las Vegas. You know, like he established that, you know, essentially he owned Las Vegas. Like he called the shots of everything that went down in the city. Um, I established before that when I first heard that, I didn't know if Dan was just had a really big ego and he was just blowing smoke, thinking that he was just like a badass, or if he was being literal, saying that he owns the city. Like everybody, you know, everybody listens to him. And then as I got to know Dan, it started making a little bit more sense of why he would say these things. You know, as I learned, Dan belonged to some organization called the Lion's Den, where big key, you know, people who live in Las Vegas, doesn't necessarily, they don't have to live in Las Vegas, but they, Dan, like every, I don't know, once a month or every couple weeks, I don't know how often they meet up, but important people in high positions of power, whether it's in law enforcement, corporations, the casinos, you know, different layers within society, these high positions, they attend the Lion's Den and they have these meetings and they talk about things and plot and scheme all types of shit. This is stuff that Dan told me about, right? So just remember, around this time, Dan, because I did DMT at his place and I continued spending time with Dan rather than running away and never coming back, I came back after, you know, I told you I stayed there for like, it was 2 or 3 nights in 4 days, or 2 nights and 3 days. I can't remember, but I stayed at his place for a few nights, and then I continued on my road trip down to Sedona, and then went to Utah and Colorado, then back to Utah, and then eventually I went all the way back to Las Vegas and met up with Dan again. I was gone for 2 or 3 weeks, but Dan, before I had left, I told Dan I would come back, and so Dan told me I had his blessings, as if he was giving me permission to go down into Sedona and Utah and, you know, go have my road trip on the promise that I would come back. And because I promised that, I wasn't fucked with. That entire trip, that entire trip that I went on with mushrooms, I left with probably a couple ounces of mushrooms, and I went and did mushrooms down in Arizona and Utah and stuff, and I wasn't messed with the entire time. I had nothing but positive, good experiences, and a lot of that, as I would later learn, is because Dan had the idea that, you know, because I did go back, but Dan had in his brain that he had me fooled or tricked to perceive him as somebody who I should look up to, who at some point I might join his team, you know, or he would recruit me or whatever. That's what Dan's goal was. You know, by having me come back and not murdering me, his goal was to essentially recruit me and make me one of his little puppets. You know, whatever benefits and things that I benefited would benefit, whatever I would get out of the relationship, whatever benefits I would receive, good for me. But at the same time, Dan wanted to claim control over me as if I was a puppet. I was aware of this. Dan was not aware that I was aware. And so when I promised to come back, Dan had this idea that he had my mind tricked and he could essentially, you know, tell me whatever, show me whatever, and at some point I would join forces with him. But that's not how it worked out, okay? That's not how it worked out, but that's where Dan was operating from, you know, from all the way from March until about July. So from March until about July of 2018, about July. I'll explain what happened in July, but not right at this moment. But I'm just saying, as far as from March until July, Dan had this idea that he had me under his control. He didn't know if he really had me, but he thought he was getting there. You know, some of these things take time. And he thought if he hooked me up with whatever I wanted and just pretended to be my friend, at some point I would fully commit and pledge myself to him. And that was during about this time span, okay? And there's a lot of stuff that happened in that time span. Oh, there's a little kid, little child screaming. I'm parked in a parking lot at a park. don't know if the microphone can pick it up. It's like a little child crying or screaming. I don't know. Anyways, I'll probably pause the camera because that's kind of annoying. You know, it's kind of weird. I'll show you guys where I'm parked at right now, just so you know I'm not parked in some sketchy ass place. Hold on, I gotta take the camera off the tripod. Remember, I'm parked at the coast right now. So, I'm parked in the parking lot. So, there's a thing, but, it's nothing exciting. I'm just parked in the parking lot at this place. And there's just people. There's a park. You know, there's like a park where you can go down to the beach. And it's not far away, but this is just a parking lot where people stay, you know, they can leave their vehicles. So there's a little child being noisy. It's nothing weird. It's just, I don't know why he's being noisy, but you know, I just imagine you can hear that on the microphone. I just needed to kind of give you a glimpse of where I'm parked, and it's not anything weird. You never know. I gotta fix this now. Yep. Fun times. But yeah, I'm gonna take a cut. I'm gonna cut real quick and we'll continue forward. Alright. So, still the same board. Alright, we're still on the same board. So now there's one person, like, I mean, if you're somebody who's wondering, well, where did you get the mushrooms, Brandon, and where did you get the DMT? Like, where did it come from? You know, where did Dan get the DMT? Well, this is where things eventually get really fucked up and scary. This is essentially this other individual who I'm introducing into the story, if you don't already know about him, is essentially around July. Remember, I wrote down July 2018. Something happened, a big thing happened in July, and this individual who I'm introducing, his name is Joe. His name was Joe. Joe. So Joe, he was like some type of alchemist. You want to call him an alchemist. He, you know, he could grow marijuana. So not only did he know how to grow his own marijuana, he knew how to grow clean marijuana. You know, clean marijuana without all the extra stuff that makes weed kind of dirty or makes you cough and shit. He grew, as far as what I learned, he grew marijuana for medicinal purposes, where he knew how to extract, like, I don't know, the different, the THCA, THCB, the different type of cannabinoids, the CBD. He knew how to make Rick Simpson's oil, which can kind of cure, Rick Simpson's oil can cure cancer. So he knew how to make medicine out of cannabis, marijuana. And that wasn't it. Joe also knew how to synthesize and make DMT. And he also was a master of growing magic mushrooms. Not just magic mushrooms, he could grow any kind of mushrooms. And, he was kind of like an he was like kind of like an alternative medicine dealer. You could call him a drug dealer, but, is marijuana a drug or is it a medicine? It just depends on, again, I've talked about this. It depends on your perspective and what you define as a drug or medicine. It depends on you and what you personally perceive. But there are people out in the world who do perceive marijuana/cannabis as a medicine, and they don't look at it as a drug. Sure, it can be considered one, but at the same time, it can also be considered an actual natural medicine. Just depends on if it's grown in a clean way or if it's just having all types of chemicals dumped into it so you can get, some really dirty weed. So same thing with mushrooms. You can call it a medicine because it's natural. It grows from the earth. Yes, you can kind of manipulate the environment as, in a way that you're getting different types of results that don't really grow in a natural way. But, mushrooms at a core, they are a natural thing. But I'm saying are mushrooms a drug or a medicine? Just depends on you as the viewer and how you look at it. Yes, they do have some very dangerous elements within them for sure, but if done correctly, you can actually heal PTSD, depression. You can, if you have brain damage and you have your nervous system where you're not making connections between your nervous system and your brain, those connections can be restored through the compounds, the medicinal compounds within mushrooms. But it's all got to be, you got to know what you're doing in order to yield these healthy, positive benefits out of it, right? So Joe was somebody who knew how to do all of these things. He could grow mushrooms, he knew how to synthesize DMT, and he knew how to grow and create medicinal marijuana, in which Joe, he had a business. So you call him a drug dealer, okay, but I didn't know Joe well enough to know if he was up to anything mischievous, if he was doing anything bad. I don't know what all he was up to. I just know from my encounters with him, he had a business and he was selling, cannabis. You could buy flour from him. You could buy dabs from him. You could buy mushrooms from him or DMT. And he literally had a business based out of Las Vegas. And he even used social media to advertise. And if you contacted him and he felt like you were a person that he trusted, he would sell to you. Okay. He got careless as time went on. He got careless as far as him taking bigger risks than he should have, and a lot of those risks that he was taking as far as openly dealing, Dan was part of that, helping him, kind of pushing him in that direction. But, Joe, that's who Joe was as far as a character, a name for you to identify with. I do have some pictures, not of Joe, but again, when I first met Dan, and I did DMT at Dan's house that first day, and then stayed the night at his house that night. The following day, Dan, because I told Dan I'd stick around for a few days, Dan invited me to meet Joe. Okay, so this is when, because initially it was before, when I first met Dan got the DMT from Joe. And that's, when I smoked the DMT at Dan's house, well, it came from Joe, okay? So it came from Joe, right over here, stay. And then the following day, that's when Dan introduced me to Joe. So therefore, because we were introduced, this tether was created, okay? So when I went on my road trip, after my 3 days in Las Vegas with Dan, and his wife, Jamie, and then also we're going to have Jamie, his wife. Jamie. Dan, here. That's kind of confusing. I need to keep it consistent. Hold on. We'll just do this. So you got this tether right here. We'll put Jamie, which is Dan's wife. Okay, so these two are connected, and then when I met Dan, well, because I met Dan, at some point I met his wife, so there's a connection here, okay? And because these two know each other, there's a connection here. So there's these connections that are forming. But, Jamie's not really, she's always in the background. She's always been kept in the background. I'll talk about her in a little bit, but not right now. But I'm just saying, as far as when I first made it down to Vegas, and when I left Las Vegas and continued down to Arizona, I left with I think I bought 2 ounces of mushrooms. So I went down into Arizona and Utah with 2 ounces of mushrooms, and it came from Joe. But Dan is the one that introduced me to Joe to make it all happen, to make these things happen. And again, I don't really know much about Joe, but one thing that I really do need to mention is that when Dan first introduced me to Joe, like I went with Dan in Dan's vehicle, but me. So Dan's wife Jamie and myself, we all traveled to Joe's house, which is when I was introduced to Joe, okay? And when I was first introduced to Joe, Dan started showing me around Joe's house, all the trippy artwork, because he was a dealer of mushrooms and DMT and acid, like psychedelics. So you can imagine he had all types of trippy looking artwork hanging up around his house. How he got all of it, that's not where we're going, but I'm just saying he had a whole bunch of trippy artwork around his house. Dan showed me around his house a little bit, and then at some point Dan took me into Joe's kitchen and opened up one of Joe's little mini refrigerators, and Dan pointed out a little petri dish of roofies. I don't know, it was like the date rape drug. I forget the technical name for for the date rape drug, but it's also known as like roofies, right? But apparently Joe had that in his fridge alongside with these other things that he's created. So apparently Joe knew how to make that stuff too. So I mean, what was he doing with that? I don't know. Maybe not good things. I don't know. I can't accuse him because I don't have those answers, but Dan specifically came, like when I first got introduced to Joe, Dan specifically took me into Joe's kitchen and pointed that out and told me what it was. And then part of me, a little bit later down the road, I started thinking, and it made me wonder, what if, in an alternate scenario, you remember when I told you how I had a hit on my life that like they were planning on murdering me? And how I told you how when I crossed paths with Dan, like instead of running, I met him, and instead of disrespecting him, I respected him, right? And instead of running away with the DMT that he sold me, I did it at his house. Well, in an alternate scenario, imagine had I refused to do DMT at Dan's house, but he was still willing to sell me the DMT. And so who's to say, maybe in an alternate scenario, maybe he would have not given me DMT, and it would have been roofies or something that he would have sold me, and I would have gone out into the desert and I would have smoked it or whatever, thinking it was DMT, but it would have been something else. So whatever happened, whatever crazy shit happened as a product of smoking that drug, well, whenever it was that I came to, I probably wouldn't remember anything that happened. I mean, if you know what the date rape drug is, well, you can't remember what happens to you. As far as my knowledge of what the date rape drug is, you lose your ability to remember. So anything scary could have happened, but all the same, Dan showed that to me. I have no idea why Joe had it in his fridge or what they had been doing with it, but that is something I became aware of, which is pretty fucking scary. Right, that's pretty scary in itself. Okay, but all this said, where I'm going with this is Joe became somebody who because we established a connection, and then I became aware of Joe, and then Dan thought that he was going to manipulate me and pull me into whatever they've been up to. I don't know. So this became this thing where all of a sudden this door opened where anytime, because I actually do enjoy doing mushrooms. DMT, even though it's pretty scary and gnarly, and it's a whole nother ball game, way more than even what mushrooms are. But I can handle it. Like those experiences are something that I can benefit from and make use of, and turn around and help people with the things I learn. I can handle DMT and mushrooms and in a way that others might not be able to. And I'm saying that when I met Dan and then I got introduced to Joe, it was like this door opened where, so long as I got money, I can do mushrooms when I want to, and when I run out, all I got to do is hit up Joe all I gotta do is message Joe or message Dan and give them an address, and they'll send it to me, right? They'll just ship it to me, right? Okay, so that became a thing. So, like I said, from March until July, that became a door that was opened. Obviously, there's a whole lot more for me to tell you about, but that's just the base of what you need to know, and I'm going to be expanding upon that, okay? So this is like the second day there, my second day. This is the day after I've smoked DMT for my first time. And remember, I described what that experience was like. So at that time, back in March 2018, my mind I had so much shit going through my mind. I didn't even really know what was going on. I was just kind of following Dan around where he was leading me and listening to him speak. Dan just loves to talk. He loves to talk. And if you're somebody that will just listen, he'll let you, as long as you're willing to sit there and listen, he'll talk your ear off. But I'm telling you, there's a lot of things that he shares. It's a lot of lies and manipulation, and he knows exactly what he's doing to try and twist your brain. So these are things that, like I said, when I did my DMT ride, wherever I went, I was updated and told who Dan is and what he's doing and what he's going to be trying to do to me. So the following day when I'm back, I'm aware of what Dan is trying to do, but at the same time, I have no idea what the fuck's going on. I'm just following him along and just blindly following him along, and I'm just observing, watching, listening, meeting people he's showing me, all of these different things. But at the same time, I have no idea what's going to be coming later down the road. I'm just living by the day, in the present moment. I'm there. And because I was there, that's when I met Joe, and that's when I became aware of Joe's business. And then, that's when, months later and stuff, when I separated, during March and April, those 2 months, where I was kind of bouncing around between Las Vegas and Zion National Park and Las Vegas and not Zion National Park. I was going all over these places. But during that time, that's when I was learning what Dan and Joe are up to. As far as what I had learned, Dan was essentially Joe's apprentice. Dan was learning how to grow mushrooms by Joe. Joe was literally teaching him how to do it from step one to the very last step, as far as how to grow mushrooms, how to harvest them, how to dry them, and then selling them. At some point, Dan was even advertising on his own Instagram account, advertising for Joe. He would refer people to Joe. At the same time, Dan was trying to also keep his hands off, where anybody that wanted to buy mushrooms, Dan would always point his fingers to Joe, where essentially, you'll find out where this was leading down the road. Dan was actively involved with learning how to grow the mushrooms. He was spending all this time with Joe, helping him get them distributed and all of that stuff. But when it came to like social media or public stuff, Dan was never directly selling to certain people, and he was doing everything he can to just refer all of it to Joe, and then all the money that Joe was making would go through Joe's bank accounts and all of that, and then Dan was just benefiting through Joe, if that makes sense. Joe was putting himself at risk by all the exposure he was willing to do for him. Joe was willing to expose himself to try selling his product. And at the same time, Joe had the perception that Dan had him protected as if it was an okay thing. And that's what I had learned, that Dan, whatever Dan's connections are, it was kind of like a sanctioned thing where Joe was being allowed to do all of this, even though it's probably illegal and all that, but it was being allowed. And, whatever. It was some pretty messed up stuff. But again, I don't even really know what the fuck's going on. I just did DMT for the first time, and remember, I was originally just planning on stopping and buying this stuff and then continuing down to Arizona and going and doing it by myself. But all of a sudden, I'm in Dan's company and following him around, and I've been told that I had a hit on my life, and now the hit has been canceled. So long as I'm essentially, as long as Dan perceives that he's mind controlling me or tricking me or he's going to recruit me, well, then I ain't got nothing to worry about, right? You know? So, but at the same time, I'm aware of this shit. And I'm learning all this stuff. And at the same time, I actually do enjoy the mushrooms because I'm tapping into things that I had never even been aware of. Between the DMT and the mushrooms, like I said with DMT, Dan and I kept going back and forth. Like, I did DMT, Dan did DMT. I did DMT, Dan did DMT. And we kept going back and forth over those 2 months. And I think just with Dan alone, I think I did DMT like 10 times in Dan's company. I think Dan did DMT like 15 times in my company. Somewhere around there. I can't give you the exact number. But aside from the mushrooms are entirely a different story. I mean, the experiences are different, but they're also similar. But I'm just saying, with mushrooms, I enjoy mushrooms. They have helped me in many ways, where I have learned things that have otherwise been hidden from me for the majority of my lifetime. Okay, so even though all this bad stuff was going on, when this door was open between Joe and I, to where I could get mushrooms when I wanted them, as I wanted them, as long as I had the money to pay for them, well, I started getting on this mushroom routine where, like, you know, I started doing mushrooms regularly, where I would go somewhere private, somewhere completely away from people, and I would do mushrooms and just spend 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 hours in my own space, tripping and just, you know, tripping, but essentially observing, watching, listening, just these things I was encountering. Right, so like mushrooms have helped me in so many ways. Like magic mushrooms have saved my life. If I have not had mushrooms in my life, I wouldn't be here today. I would probably be dead or locked up somewhere. But mushrooms, by doing mushrooms, I have tapped into things that I didn't know exist and have connected with, like I said, I found Heavenly Father, and, you know, I've woke up to who I am, and I've encountered archangels and all of these entities that have been helping me remember who I am and how powerful I am and what my mission is for being here, and then also making me aware of what I'm up against and what's happening. There's a whole combination. It's not just one answer. It's a whole bunch of stuff. Okay? And so when Joe came into my life, you know, by being introduced through Dan, you know, I don't know what Joe was up to. I don't know if he was out there hurting people or doing fucked up stuff. But whatever he was up to, that wasn't a thing that I was conscious of. It was, from my perspective, Joe was the person to go to for me to get access to these mushrooms that were helping me. But at the same time, there's a whole bunch of stuff, all these people in the background that I don't even know. All these people that know about me, but I don't know about them. And it's just from my shoes. If you could imagine being me, it's just me and my dog. And all of these people are just showing up and trying to manipulate me down these different paths. And I'm aware of what they're trying to do, and I don't trust any of these people that I'd been encountering. But at the same time, when I met Joe and all of a sudden I got access to mushrooms, well, when I started incorporating mushrooms into my life, where I would make time to start consuming, you know, whether 3 grams of mushrooms or 5 grams or 6 grams, 7 grams sometimes, you know, depending on the situation and where I'm at, and if I felt like I was in a safe spot where I could do a larger dose. Well, when I did them, I was learning things that all these people I was meeting, all these strange people that I was encountering, who at face value I could just see that they're being deceptive and that they're lying and things are not as they appear. Well, every time I did mushrooms, it was like I was tapping into these higher frequencies, like God or my guardian angels. I was encountering these other beings, and it was like literally like they were talking to me, telling me what's happening, and they were filling me in on things that were happening behind my back. It was like having, if you imagine angels and different entities who are out in the world and they're following people around and they know who the bad guys are, and these bad guys are plotting and doing things behind my back. Well, these entities, these beings, when I would do mushrooms, they would tell me about what's happening in the background sometimes. It's not always about being specific, saying what exactly was happening, but they're giving me a heads up that things are not as they appear. And if I watch closely, I can, if I'm watching closely and I watch Dan closely, at some point, think about all the time I had been spending with him. As long as I was always watching him, he would slip every once in a while, and he did. Over those 2 months that I spent at his house, or the month that I spent at his house, over a period of 2 months, I spent a month at his house combined, and all of that time he slipped a few different times. One of the times while he was on DMT, there's a few, I'll list out a few things. One of the times he did DMT, I seen his eyes turn straight black. Like you got the whites of your eyes and your iris and your pupil. Well, I think it was like the first or second time I watched him do DMT, his eyes turned full black. There was no whites. Okay, so that was a slip. I saw something that he didn't want me to know about. And if you want to have a common denominator as far as talking about black eyes, I've seen Dan's eyes turn full black. I've seen Jerry, my dad, Jerry. I've seen his eyes turn full black like twice, 2 or 3 times. And I've seen Kelly's eyes turn full black. So if you're looking for common denominators, all three of them, their eyes have turned full black. Okay. But we're going to back up. When I'm talking about times that Dan has slipped, well, the first one was when his eyes turned black. Another time on a separate DMT ride, a different DMT experience that he had. There was one time I was sitting on the couch, on his couch, watching him as he is on the influence of DMT. I'm not. I'm sober, and I'm watching him do it. Well, wherever he is, I don't know. But at some point while he's on his DMT, he looked over at me, got this really scary, angry look on his face, and he's like, "I own you. I own you." He said it one time, but he said he owned me. And I was like, and I said, "What?" Because I heard what he said, but I asked him what to see if he would repeat it. But he realized that, I don't know, if that was him or something else speaking through him, I don't know. But whatever it was, it realized that it slipped and said something that it shouldn't have. And so when I asked him what, trying to get him to repeat himself, he just shook his head and kind of turned away to dismiss me, like he wasn't going to repeat himself again. Another time that he slipped, it was I think it was like the second time I was going to Zion National Park. So the day I left Dan's house, like I left in the afternoon, Dan had consumed a bunch of mushrooms, and he tried to get me to do mushrooms with him that afternoon, therefore postpone my trip to Zion because I wanted to get away from Dan. And I had also just bought another ounce of mushrooms from Joe. So I bought an ounce of mushrooms from Joe, and I wanted to go to Zion National Park and go out on public land outside of the boundaries and do mushrooms out there. But so I left Las Vegas with an ounce of mushrooms, but Dan tried getting me to consume mushrooms at his house so I wouldn't leave Zion, or wouldn't leave his house to go to Zion. But he ate them anyways, and I didn't, and I ended up leaving Vegas in my van with my dog. And right around the time when I got on the outskirts of Vegas and I was just about to leave city limits of the Vegas area, Dan called me on the phone. He was fully tripping balls, like wherever he was at, wherever his mind was at while he was on his mushrooms, I don't know, but he was in a negative place. And he started screaming at me, demanding for me to turn around in my van and telling me that I have to drive all the way back to his house. And he was essentially asserting dominion over my life as if he owned me. And he was very angry at me for leaving Vegas. He had this idea that I wasn't going to come back, and he was demanding that I come back to his house as if he owned me. But I told him no. I ended up just kept on driving and went to Vegas, or went to Zion. But I did go back to Vegas, after I think I stayed in Zion area for about a week. And then I ended up going back to Vegas and crossing path and spending time with Dan again. And when I spent time with him after he had yelled at me, he was like very docile and kind of, I don't know, he said he was ashamed of how he behaved or something like that. He was ashamed of himself for behaving that way around me. So, but that did, that happened. That scared the shit out of me. I was like, who the fuck is this? I had an idea who Dan was because it was shown to me on DMT who he was, so I was told who he was. But at the same time, this is my first time really meeting the guy, and in my lifetime, this is my first time meeting the guy. So there's a whole lot that's kind of scary, and I had no idea what to think about it. Okay, so that's a lot of things for you to think about. Okay, but remember the focus of conversation where I'm going is just showing you these connections of things that happened in the past. There's a whole lot I can tell you entirely about my time in Las Vegas. But it would take hours and hours and hours and hours, and that's not the direction I'm trying to go with this video. Right now, the point is I'm just showing you where some of these connections were formed. And so back then, this is how I met Joe. This is how I all of a sudden had access to mushrooms and DMT. When I came back, when I left Las Vegas and returned back to Oregon sometime around the end of April, Dan had tried getting me to move in with him and his wife and to live in one of their spare bedrooms. That by the second month, after spending 2 months in that general area and about a month with Dan, he was really trying to get me to move in with him and his wife and live, to take up their spare bedroom. And so therefore my dog and myself, we would literally be stuck there with him and his wife. Therefore Dan would just put so much shit in my brain. If I would have done that, I can't even imagine how twisted he would have tried, how much he would have tried twisting my brain. But I denied him. I told him I couldn't do that. So at the end of April, rather than accepting Dan's offer to move in with him, I told Dan I can't, because I have my dog, he's a husky. Huskies have a double layer fur coats because huskies are meant to be where it's cold, not where it's hot. And because it was the end of April, meaning that summer was not far away in Las Vegas, I told Dan I can't stay in Las Vegas with my dog. It's going to be too hot down here in Las Vegas, and I have to go north. I wanted to go up to Montana. And I told Dan, I'm going to go up to Montana for the summer. And then once the summer passes, perhaps, I don't know if I'll come back to Vegas, but Dan was talking about wanting to move out of Vegas. Either way, I'm going to explain all this later, but I'm saying Dan was wanting to leave Vegas, for whatever reasons. And I got out of Vegas entirely with Milwaukee in April 2018 and told Dan I had to go north because Milwaukee can't be down in Vegas during the summer. So that's how I got out of Las Vegas. That's how I got away from Dan back then initially. My dog saved me from getting trapped down there, and for a legitimate reason too. Milwaukee can't stay down there during the summertime, so that was a legitimate excuse to not to turn him down, right? That was a legitimate reason to turn down Dan to where he would not feel disrespected because he could see I have my dog and he could understand that, yeah, it's too hot down here. So he allowed me to leave, right? He allowed me to leave Las Vegas under the promise that him and I would eventually cross paths again and then we would continue where we left off. That's how I got away from Vegas. There's a whole lot of stuff that happened that I haven't told you about, but I'm just saying the focus is on mushrooms and showing you connections of how certain things played out the way they did. When I left Las Vegas and returned back to Central Oregon, I don't think my mom and dad, or at least my dad, I don't think my dad expected to see me again. From just the energy, the reception that I got when I returned back to Central Oregon, it felt like there were certain individuals who did not expect to see me again. They expected me to either, if I had a hit on my life and I had originally gone south and people that tried setting all that up, they expected me to have been assassinated and disappear. but now I'm back. And so there were things, the way I was treated when I returned back to Central Oregon, I could pick up on it, but nobody was being honest with me. Nobody's telling me anything. I could just pick up on this energy. Okay, when I left Las Vegas and I went back to Oregon, I had returned back to Oregon, I think with 1 gram of DMT that Joe has sold me. Between Joe and Dan, they agreed to allow me to go back to Oregon with 1 gram of DMT, and I think I had 1 ounce of mushrooms with me too. This is the money. I had money. Remember, I had just finished working my seasonal job, hanging Christmas lights and taking Christmas lights down. So I had a whole bunch of money that I earned from my seasonal job that paid for all the fuel all the fuel expenses for going down to the Southwest in my road trip, as well as the mushrooms and all of that I bought. I paid for that, all of it, honestly. I just used the money I earned from my seasonal job, and then my plan was I was going to get once I got back to Oregon, I was planning on going up to Montana, just like the previous summer. The previous summer, I had gone to Montana in my travel van, and I was just doing yard maintenance, yard work for people that I was making contacts with through Craigslist. Well, I was planning on doing that again for a second summer. I was going right back up to Montana. So the money I had just spent on this trip down to Nevada, Arizona, and Utah, and all the mushrooms I bought and the DMT, I had to pay for all that. It wasn't free. And so I spent a good chunk of the money I had earned that winter, but I also had enough money to get me all the way to Montana, and I was just going to pick up from where I left off. So money wasn't an issue for me, and I was paying for all of this honestly. I wasn't out there committing crimes. I wasn't out there hurting anybody. Yeah, I was buying these substances that might have been otherwise illegal or are illegal, but other than that, I wasn't stealing. I wasn't out there hurting people. I just happened to cross paths with Dan. Whatever Dan's background is and all the people that he hurts and what all the crimes that he's made, well, I ain't got nothing to do with that, man. Me getting pulled into his web, I never got recruited. I never fucking pledged allegiance, any of that shit. Like, I did what I had to do to fool Dan in order to survive and get away from him without getting murdered. I was playing a very fucking delicate and dangerous game of not arousing his suspicion as if he became aware that I knew what he was up to. I had to play stupid. And at the same time, there was 1 or 2 times when I did do DMT at Dan's house, and he did something to me. I barely even remember it, but one of the DMT rides that I did, he sat down next to me. I was under the influence, and Dan sat down next to me. And I don't know if he put some type of spell or dark magic or something. He did something to me while I was under the influence. I remember him doing it to me, and I knew what he was doing to me as he was doing it to me. And I remember crying as he was doing it to me, but there wasn't anything I could do, right? There wasn't anything I could do. And then after the DMT ride ended, I didn't really remember. It kind of just, the memory of what he did went away. I just knew he did something to me. And at the same time, I had to play stupid and act like I didn't notice, or act like I don't remember, or act like it was insignificant. But I still remember. I know he did something to me back then while I was in Las Vegas under the influence. Okay. So that all happened. Okay. But at some point, remember, I was also, while all these scary things were happening, I also had good guys on my side. I had Heavenly Father, and I had guardian angels and archangels protecting me. And at the same time, every time I was doing mushrooms, anytime I did mushrooms when I wasn't near Dan and I was in my own space, that was when I was having these other things come and communicate with me, letting me know what has happened and telling me, pulling me out of the darkness, so to speak, helping me become more clear-sighted, becoming more aware of these things that are just happening in the background that are affecting me in a negative way. So that's where these mushrooms, they have saved my life, but at the same time, they have also put me in danger, because these bad guys out there who have been monitoring me while I've been on mushrooms, they've caught on that the mushrooms are not are not twisting my mind in a way that benefits those who are trying to put me under mind control. Instead, I have tapped into things through the mushrooms that are letting me know what they're doing. So essentially what they're trying to do is not only backfiring, but they're also exposing themselves. And this is progressively this has progressively become more and more disturbing and sadistic. As you know, when July 2018 came around, I was all the way up in Montana, and when July 2018 came around, that's when Joe got murdered. As far as that's when around before Joe got murdered, I was having a lot of stuff happening to me. I've already talked about this on one of my other videos, as far as people coming into my life and trying to bait me on a boat to drive to, they tried baiting me to drive all the way to the East Coast, get on a ship or a boat and float with some group up to like the North Pole to find out what's up there. Okay. So that I've already told that story. I'm not going to repeat it again, but that was this summer right around here. That was after I got away from Dan in Las Vegas and made my way back up into Montana, and then a whole bunch of crazy shit started happening while I was up there. Well, I was catching on to a lot of bad stuff, and at the same time, while I was in Montana, I was still maintaining a connection with Joe, where Joe was actually shipping mushrooms to me all the way up to Montana. So because I was working, doing yard work, and I was earning my money honestly up in Montana, well, once I received the package, whenever, on a Friday night, it became this thing when I was up to in Montana. Joe and I had, again, I don't know what Joe had been up to in the background. I don't know if he was doing bad, mischievous, malevolent stuff to other people. But as far as my relationship with Joe, he always came off as a friend. I mean, not like a close friend or anything. I didn't really know anything about him, but he would always help me out if I ever wanted anything from him. He would always be Johnny on the spot to send me what I wanted. And so when I was up in Montana, I was earning my money honestly. I was out there doing yard work, working hourly. I was, pulling weeds, doing all types of like landscaping type work that just through contacts I had made through Craigslist. And so when I had enough money, all I had to do is contact Joe, and he would literally ship me like an ounce of mushrooms. I'd buy an ounce of mushrooms at a time, and I think at one point he ended up offering me to do. It was like at some point I might have just gotten a quarter pound. I was getting like a quarter pound of mushrooms at a time, so I didn't have to bother him, so he wouldn't have to do it. A quarter pound of mushrooms would last me a while, right? So this connection was established. So when I got up to Montana and had started earning my own money, well, when it came to like Fridays or Saturday, well, I would go somewhere private, a really pretty location, somewhere I wouldn't be bothered, somewhere that I couldn't do, I wouldn't be bothering anybody. I'd just go a private location out in nature, and I would consume my mushrooms, and every single time I was doing them, I was having a wonderful time, and I was learning all kinds of amazing things. Okay? And so, because I was not around negative people, I was constantly learning positive things that was helping me, because I've had a bunch of bad stuff happen to me through my lifetime, helping me through different, traumas or negative stuff that I had attached to my life, so those, every time I would go out and do mushrooms, it was just a one-on-one experience with myself and Heavenly Father and the angels and stuff, for them to help me get my soul back in realignment, essentially. As I was having all my mushroom rides, I had great experiences. As far as I remember, back then, when I was out on my own and I had access to the mushrooms, I never had any bad experiences, nothing crazy or anything. Okay? But at the same time, remember, Dan, because I'm in Montana, well, Dan and Joe, they're in Las Vegas, so they're still spending time together. Okay, so right, just imagine Joe's not dead yet. So he's not dead yet. They're still alive, and Dan and as far as I told you, Dan was essentially Joe's apprentice, learning how to grow mushrooms. Okay, he was learning how to grow mushrooms through Joe. Okay, he was learning how to grow mushrooms through Joe, and essentially between Dan and Joe, they had a lot of people contacting them on social media asking to buy mushrooms, and so Dan would refer people to Joe. Joe would process the financial transaction, and then Joe would either ship the person the mushrooms, or Joe would have Dan would go ship the mushrooms, because Dan's at Joe's house helping him grow them and harvest them and package it all up and everything. But Joe's just handling the money, right? So I'm saying back then when I'm in Montana, those two are interacting amongst each other. But I'm having positive interactions with him, but also at the same time I'm getting fucked with. Like I said, I'm getting fucked with while I'm in Montana. And because I told you that Dan had slipped multiple times while I was in Las Vegas, well, I was aware that Dan might not actually be my friend, and so I wasn't really communicating with Dan as much, So at some point, I was kind of just not communicating with Dan as much, and I was just talking to him. Well, don't you think Dan's probably picking that up? And then Joe tells Dan that he's going to send me some mushrooms, but I'm not talking to Dan about it. I'm kind of pushing Dan out. And then at some point, something happened between them. But, there's also a lot of things that happened up in Montana. I don't know. I feel like back then, Dan may have tried getting Joe to send, because I kept buying mushrooms from Joe. Dan might have tried getting Joe to mail me poisonous mushrooms, rather than sending me healthy mushrooms or psychedelic mushrooms. He would send me poisonous mushrooms, and then when I eat those things, it would either kill me or cause me to lose control over myself, and therefore I get arrested for some stupid reason, right? I don't know, but I'm just saying something happened between these two in Las Vegas, where at some point Dan contacted me, so Dan contacted me, letting me know that Joe had just left everything behind at his house. Joe had his own house in Las Vegas. He had a dog. He had his own house, not an apartment or anything. He had his own house, fully furnished with all of his own stuff and everything. And that's where he was operating his business. So Dan tells me that Joe is going to California. Say that Joe just left Vegas and went to California to go meet up with a girlfriend. Okay, so I'm going to draw somebody. There's a girlfriend, say Joe's girlfriend. Joe's girlfriend, GF, I'm just putting GF, girlfriend in California. Okay? So that's the initial story. I'm initially told by Dan. Dan tells me that Joe is no longer in Vegas, that he just went to California to go meet up with a girlfriend of his. And then not a little bit later, Dan tells me that Joe's house got raided by Las Vegas Police Department or Las Vegas SWAT team. I don't know, one of the two. That Joe's house got raided, and that Dan, Joe had left and was in California, right? Had left to go see his girlfriend in California. That was the original story. And so Dan, as far as what Dan told me that he was house sitting for Joe. Dan and his wife Jamie, they were house sitting for Joe, and they were watching over Joe's dog and watching over Joe's business. That's what Dan told me, just watching over Joe's stuff, house sitting while Joe goes he's just house sitting while Joe goes visits his girlfriend in California. Okay, well, while Joe is supposedly gone to California, that's when Joe's house got raided by Las Vegas police. And Dan and his wife Jamie were at Joe's house when Las Vegas came pounding on the door to bust the door down and raided the house. Dan essentially opened the door, let Las Vegas police inside Joe's house, and then that's when Dan said Dan walked free. Dan was never held accountable, never charged any crimes as far as Joe's mushroom operation or Joe's mushroom and DMT business. Dan literally put his hands up saying that he told the police, and he even signed a piece of paper saying that him and his wife are only at Joe's house to watch after his dog, and that everything in Joe's house, Dan claimed to have nothing to do with it, and he had I don't know, he said he had no knowledge of Joe's mushroom business and had nothing to do with it. So even though Dan had previously been Joe's apprentice, helping him with every aspect of the business, and that's how I learned about everything, was through Dan, and then being introduced to Joe through Dan, all that stuff, right? But all of a sudden, Dan claimed that he's just friends with Joe, and he's just there to watch after his dog and watch after the house, and had nothing to do with all this other stuff. So essentially, Dan signed a piece of paper saying he had nothing to do with it, and so therefore all the blame and guilt went onto Joe, right? It all went onto Joe. So Dan and his wife walked free, no charges against Dan and Jamie, even though Dan was part of it, and I know for a fact that he was. Okay, so then fast forward a little bit later, Joe died. Okay, but before Joe died, Joe texted me. I didn't know what was going on, but Joe sent me a text message telling me to stay vigilant. That's all he told me. He told me to stay vigilant. So, essentially pay attention. There's, that's all he said was stay vigilant, but essentially if you want to expand upon that, he's telling me there's danger and I need to be paying attention. That's kind of what he was trying to convey to me. But, apparently, whatever went down between those two, I think Joe refused Dan. Joe refused to do what Dan was trying to get Joe to do. And then Dan probably threatened Joe with his mushrooms. And then Joe refused. Dan still refused to be blackmailed or threatened or coerced or anything. And I think Joe bailed and went to California to this supposed girlfriend. I don't know. Dan told me it was his girlfriend, but I don't know if that's what Joe's perspective was. Joe might have just been going to California towards somebody that he perceived he could trust. And that's where my question is. I'm wondering, I don't have the facts, but maybe wondering, was it Kelly? Was Kelly the one? Kelly? I've mentioned this person, Kelly. Well, she lives in California, and from what I learned, that's the direction that Joe went. And then I have, if you saw that screen recording that I got, if you remember the video that I have on my YouTube channel, This is Chess, Not Checkers, and I attached that screen recording where I'm literally recording a text conversation with this individual who I perceive as Kelly. Well, if you remember, I caught her where she said, first Joe, then your dog while you watch, then you, then the world. So that's where I'm kind of making this connection where who is this person that Joe went to in California that Dan said it was Joe's girlfriend, but I don't know if that's true. Either way, Joe's house got raided. Joe was no longer, he bailed, he got the hell out of Vegas and ran probably towards somebody who he perceived he could trust. And then when he arrived in California, that's when Joe supposedly killed himself. That's when Dan got a hold of me and told me that Joe hung himself, said he committed suicide. But, the last text message I got from Joe, he was telling me to stay vigilant. And then and at the same time, Dan told me that he just, sold Joe out. Dan essentially ratted. Dan, if you're looking at, anybody who don't like rats, if you're one of the bad guys and you don't like rats, you don't like anybody, you don't like snitches, you want to know who the original rat and snitch is? Dan is. Dan's the original rat and snitch. Dan ratted on Joe, even though Dan was helping Joe with his business. Even though he was helping Joe with every aspect of it. Well, the day that Dan got confronted by the Las Vegas police. I mean, that could have all just been set up because Joe refused them. But either way, Dan signed his name as if he had no involvement with what Joe had going on. Therefore, Dan evaded any type of accountability, any type of criminal charges or anything. And Dan and Jamie walked free. And because Joe knew things that, he knew things that Dan and Jamie and all of them don't want to be leaked out. If there's secrets that Joe knew that he could eventually share with me, well, they went and murdered Joe to silence to bury the truth and silence what was actually happening in the background. So Joe died. He's dead. As far as I was aware, he got murdered. And then you have this individual, Kelly. I mean, at the time, I had not made any of those connections. I had not connected that those two might have been connected. I don't know. But how do you know these two were not how do you know these two were not relaying to each other, and then at the same time, these are relaying with each other? How do I know, Jerry, because Dan and Jerry were connected before I was even connected with Dan. Well, because Dan knows about this, and then when I made it back from Las Vegas to Oregon, and Jerry was not expecting to see me again, maybe. Well, and then at the same time, they see me communicating with Joe, and I'm getting on, and I'm buying mushrooms, and I'm doing mushrooms, and it's what they had been trying to do isn't working. So Jerry, he's probably becomes aware of Joe and doesn't like that Joe and I are becoming kind of friends. I don't know. I don't really know much about Joe, but Joe was hooking me up. He was helping me out. How do I know that Jerry and Dan did not work together to put something in motion where the Las Vegas Police Department decided to come raid Joe's house? And because of Dan being who he is, he ratted, not only did he rat on his friend Joe and sold him out, he just stepped to the side, allowed it to happen, and then, and then all of a sudden he's free to walk. He's free to walk, and then all of a sudden things start getting out of hand later. You guys remember? Because around July 2018, that's when I became aware of all this. Holy shit, Joe's dead? What the fuck? What do you mean Joe's dead? And all of a sudden Dan had, at that point when I learned about Joe's death, at that point, Dan had already told me like 2 or 3 different narratives. He told me 2 or 3 different things about what's going on with Joe, and every single time the stories, what he shared with me, it didn't add up. Things that he shared with me just didn't add up, and that's when a lot of the other stuff that happened back here, there's a whole lot of things that are just not really adding up. Even though they are adding up, they're just not adding up in a positive way. They're adding up in a very sadistic, messed up way where there might be some really scary stuff happening in the background. What the fuck? Right? Sorry for my language, but, it's at the same time, there's some messed up stuff. And then what makes it even weirder is after Joe died, Joe's gone. Well, Joe had a family, I think he had a sister, and I think maybe a mom, and I don't know anything about Joe's family, okay, so I'm not going there. But I'm just saying, Joe's family, well, you would think, like, if, say you die, Joe died and he has a whole house full of stuff, well, you'd think all of Joe's property, including his dog, would would return to Joe's family. If he has a mom and dad or a sister, a younger or older sister, a younger or older brother, I don't know who all's in Joe's family. But you'd think all of Joe's property would go to his family, right? Well, guess who took possession of all of Joe's property for the most part? I don't know about all of it, but who took most of Joe's stuff, including Joe's dog? Dan did. When Joe got murdered, and after Dan signed that paper saying, to the Las Vegas Police Department or SWAT team saying that Dan had no involvement and essentially sold out Joe and had him murdered and all that, Dan literally had access to Joe's house where Dan took all of Joe's artwork. He took all of his stuff. He took his dog and everything that was anything of value that was of Joe's. Dan took it. And I know for a fact that he took it because when Dan moved out of Las Vegas and Dan and his wife ended up leaving Las Vegas and they moved to Oregon in March 2019, Dan and his wife, they filled up one of the biggest if you think about U-Haul, the U-Haul company, and a different size of U-Haul trucks you can get. Well, Dan and his wife, they got like the largest U-Haul truck you can order, and they filled that U-Haul truck to the fucking roof, front to back. The whole U-Haul truck was full, and they drove all the way to Oregon, which is where I met them, and I helped them unload their U-Haul truck inside some self-storage area. So when in the process of unloading all of this stuff, that's when I saw all of Joe's stuff. And I'm like, what the fuck? Why does Dan have all of Joe's property? And then, of course, I'm wondering about it. So Dan just makes up all these stories telling me how he got Joe's stuff. And it's like, okay, man, you have Joe's dog too. Well, what about Joe's family? They didn't want any of this stuff? They didn't want any of it? Okay, that's kind of strange. Even though you just sold him out, and apparently you're not really his friend. You sold out your own friend. Apparently you're still claiming his things as if you are his friend. Well, that doesn't really make any sense. It's kind of really fucked up. But, I'm thinking this all of myself. I'm not saying that out loud to Dan. But I'm just saying, when we're talking about connections and how things have gotten out of hand, well, this is a big part of it. And I only got 50 seconds left on my clock. It's 4 p.m. right now. It's going to be dark in an hour, so I'm going to have to stop talking, and I will continue tomorrow with where we've left off. Okay? So with that said, I'm not even going to talk about the editing or anything, so I'm just going to say right now, have a good afternoon, good evening, good night, or good morning, wherever you're at, and just be ready for the next video, because this is just going to get more and more fucked up. This is going to get more and more scary. Again, I said I'm going to be speaking for 6 to 10 hours. Well, we're just getting started. I have a lot more to talk about, okay? So just mentally get yourself prepared for that, and we'll continue tomorrow. So have a good one.